Cinphomaniac is full of spoilers. If the movie's there in the title, we're probably gonna say everything that happens in it. So don't fucking listen if you don't want to know.
From Studio Ghibli, the creators of the Academy Award-winning Spirited Away, Nausicaa, the Valley of the Wind, Miyazaki's epic masterpiece of a brave young princess,
Nausicaa,
and her struggle to bring peace to the world's warring kingdoms.
Who could have polluted the entire Earth?
Villagers, we have come to your land in the name of peace.
I play a character, Kushana, who is the commander of the Tamikian army.
Move out!
I started out looking at her as a villain because that's always sort of fun, but most people don't think that they're causing harm. Most people think when they do things that they're doing what they have to do. You have to get inside what is it that a person is thinking that they're trying to achieve.
Follow us and join our enterprise. We shall put the toxic jungle to the torch.
Having actually studied Japanese, its rhythms are really different than English. And so what we kind of relate to emotionally in the English language, when our voices go up, when our voices go down.
While I'm gone, begin to awaken the warrior.
For Japanese pronunciation is a totally different orientation. The measure of it was a little different, but that was a balance between the speed of the actor and the emotion and the writing.
You're letting me go?
yes, granted that you return to your kingdom.
I did get to hear some of Patrick Stewart's voice, and that was very inspiring. I mean, he is one of the great voices, and the way he uses language is beautiful.
To me, the great hope is just people who normally wouldn't make movies are going to be making them. And, suddenly one day some little fat girl in Ohio is going to be the new Mozart, and make a beautiful film with her little father's camera. To me, the great hope is girl in Ohio is going to be the new Mozart. To me, the great hope is people who normally wouldn't make movies are going to be making them. To me, the great hope is Ohio is going to be the new Mozart. To me, the great hope is people who normally wouldn't make movies are going to be making. To me, the great hope is one day some little fat girl in Ohio is going to just be Mozart. Who wouldn't make movies in Ohio is making the new Mozart. Just people who normally wouldn't make Mozart and be making. To me, the great hope girl in Ohio is going to make a Mozart beautiful film with her little father's camera recorder, and for once the so-called professionalism about moving Mozart destroyed forever, and it'll really become an art form. That's my opinion.
I mean, this is kind of exciting. This is the first time we are recording since we've officially launched.
Oh, that's true.
Yeah, and it's also, by extension, assuming everything goes according to plan, and so far, despite some major hurdles, even just yesterday, which I'm not even choosing to think about mostly, because if I do, it'll just really... It's like one of those things where it's like if you are in a war. I've never been in a war, but I've heard stories.
Okay.
So one thing, soldiers will tell you, because you might wonder, like, how could you deal with so much, death and destruction and stress and all that? And what they'll often explain is that, the first time it's so devastating, you don't know what to do. The second time, even if it's so much more worse or brutal, it's possible, and certainly ditto the third, fourth, fifth time, the more it happens, that you'll recognize it, but you'll just be like, yeah, well, I got to just move on. Because now your body is just like accepted that this is something that can happen. And even if it might be shocking for a few seconds or very frustrating or scary, like those normal responses will still happen. There's sort of like the recovery time, if you will, or the time it takes you to just like compartmentalize it and move on. It's just
you're conditioned to trauma now.
You're conditioned to trauma.
You're conditioned. You're like used to the trauma. So
yeah, which, as we know, is not a good thing in a lot of ways. But it's the reason we get that way is because we have to adapt to our circumstances. Now, as this is something that ties into the movie, of course, war is not a circumstance we should adapt to. It's something we should avoid at all costs. But
I
like
think
anything else,
that's a really interesting comment, because if you think about it, currently our country is in like 16 or 19 conflicts. And I don't think even most citizens know that. I don't think they realize we're at so much war. We're always at war. And even it's not the big ones you're thinking about. We're in all these other smaller conflicts. And they call it conflicts and not wars, so that it's less publicity. But I think you're kind of hitting the nail on the head with that. It's like we're kind of used to it. Like, oh yeah, of course we're at conflict with 16 or 19 countries. Sure, because I'm used to it. My whole life we've been in war, and I'm just used to hearing about it on the news since we were children. Always.
Yeah,
it's interesting.
It's even, I mean, and even the recognition that, like, even the 16 conflicts that we're in, it's not enough. There are plans and calls for more, for more.
100%.
Yeah. And it's incredibly disturbing to think about, but that's kind of my point too, is that the reason it's thought about, the reason it happens is because we've both normalized it as well as just ignored it, like just put it in a place where it can't be seen. And that's not like everybody willingly choosing to ignore it, by the way. That's a very cultivated effort. Well, I think it's also a very cultivated effort by the military, by our government, by the news media, to not draw too much attention to these things. It's like, imagine if things would be different. Let me put it this way, Dana. Things would be different. I think maybe not that different, because at the end of the day, how much power do we really have to change these things if we don't all act together? But if every day on every TV channel, I'm not even just talking news stations, on every internet program, on everything time someone looks at a screen, every fucking other tweet or Instagram post, there was a flashing infographic explaining the amount of violence and war going on that we're a part of, that just happens in the world, people would have a very different experience. Let me put it that way. I think that's safe to say. And the reason we 100%. Don't get that is because, the people that either benefit from it or just are otherwise feeling no other choice but to be very content with it and carry that water for, all sorts of reasons. Because I don't ever want to get in the habit of thinking or characterizing the world as run by like some nefarious folks, blah, blah, blah. I mean, to some extent, that's a fair thing to point out. But in many other ways, I think it, again, is another way we obscure the reality of the picture, which is that it's a lot of just people who are apathetic or doing things that they think are right. I mean, again, this is something that ties very deeply into Nausicaa, and I definitely want us to talk in more depth about. Every side of every war thinks they're right and just, and that it's the other side that's offensive and aggressive.
Yeah, that's kind of what we talked about in the past. I can't remember exactly which episode, but we said that villains never think that they're villains. They actually typically, especially if they're written correctly, they don't actually think they're the bad guy. They have their reasons. And typically, sometimes those reasons are often misguided kindness. Like, oh, I'm helping the world by lowering the population so humanity can survive. I just need to kill all these people to do it. That kind of, I'm not a bad guy. I'm a good guy.
No, I mean, that's exactly right. And, bringing it back to this idea of the pod and where we're at, because I do want us to get all the way into this war stuff because it's a big centerpiece of this film, but I think we probably should set up more of the film itself first. But before we even get to that, I just want to say, it's very exciting to be recording this episode with the fact that we are now launched, which means that if all goes according to plan, Friday, this episode will be going up, meaning you're actually going to get this episode when it's recorded, more or less like within 2 days. So everything will be current. Yeah. And then going forward, that'll be how we'll be doing it. We'll be recording these on Wednesday in most cases, and then releasing it on Friday. I mean, that can all change, but it'll be made clear if and when it does. And in addition to that, I'm still planning on releasing at least one additional episode from the archive each week, possibly 2 if I can make it happen. It's a lot of work, but that'll be the plan going forward until everything is out there. And then another thing I just want to put in the seed out there is it's not ready yet. It's not going up just yet. But we will be launching the Patreon, and I've just had a lot of thoughts the last 24-ish hours, or really the last 3 days, about what that content could be like, and we've talked about it. I've even had more ideas this morning, though. One thing that we're going to talk about in the context of Nausicaa is that Nausicaa is based off of Miyazaki's manga or comic book, and I would want to actually just cover that at some point, because it's very interesting, that sort of
cool,
that version of the story as opposed to this one. And to me, the way to cover it, since I can't cover it in this episode because unfortunately I still have not read it. I know.
Okay. I haven't read it either, so
I know that's true, but here's the only reason I say this, because I didn't say this to you, Dana, in advance, to be clear. When I said, let's do this, I was like in my head, great, that's my excuse to go on the reading assignment and read like all 8 volumes of this thing or whatever.
Right.
And I didn't, because of everything else going on, I did not end up getting to that, and I wasn't going to delay the episode since I saw.
Well, that's okay. It gives me time. It gives me time to watch.
Mm-hmm. Right, which is what I was going to say. So one of the ideas I have for a Patreon exclusive that I think could be really fun is I don't have a good name for it yet. The one I'm kind of testing right now is the toy chest or something. I don't know. And the idea here is, I got to come up with a better name. I thought of war chest, but I'm like, I don't like war. That's not good. Whatever it is. Just the idea of like a trunk. I don't know. And because I used to back.
Well, it's kind of patriotic, but in a negative way, not in like a patriarchal society way, like not in a America way. But you remember when women had a dowry, and it was like a trunk of just like stuff and like some sheep.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. The dowry system. Yes. I mean, I feel like some people still do that. It's definitely in some other cultures.
But just I think you're right.
Even in the US, I feel like there's definitely some like rural communities that have that. A little bit. I mean, just a little.
I kind of like that idea.
Oh, do you now? Well, wait a minute. So what? You want your father to pay your husband? That's
no. I want. Wait.
That's what a dowry is, essentially.
I want the patrons to be our patron and pay our dowry.
Oh, okay. So we're like getting married to them, and their fathers are paying us. Okay, gotcha.
No, not their father. Okay.
Well, that's okay. But you understand this? Yeah, this is a patriarchal practice, and the whole point.
It's literally patriarchal.
It's between the men. It's like the women are just a property to exchange. So it's like, you take my daughter, who's a burden to me because she eats my food.
She does eat the food.
And she's not going to produce me babies because I'm her father, and we don't do the incest thing. Wink, wink. But if you take her from me, then I will pay you in goats, which will produce you milk.
Right.
So,
So I think we're the father, and the podcast is the baby.
Yeah. Well, no, but see, but we're not paying them. I mean, I don't know. I guess it just depends on who you want to be in the scenario. And the answer for me is, I don't want to be anybody. I don't want to be anybody in that scenario. No, sir. Yeah, and it's okay to reach for the stars. How However,
we'll think of a better name.
I still need to think of a better name for all these things. I have for every idea, I have like 3 possible names for it. But that being said, the idea for this pod, the chest or whatever it ends up being called, is it would be an opportunity for me to talk about some things maybe related to some of the movies we've talked about, but otherwise maybe not, just as like basically content that isn't movies or TV shows, basically. So like things like video games, things like comic books, things like books. And I think it could range from things that are incredibly academically minded versus things that are just totally like for fun, pop. If you like, this sci-fi movie or this action thing or whatever, check out this book, check out this thing, that type of thing. And
yeah, I like that.
It could be something where, I think we could do it.
It's a variety show.
Yeah. Well, it could be like, and these would be short episodes. Cause let me tell you, obviously our main show here, these things tend to be over 2 hours, sometimes close to 3. But
sometimes close to 3.
Yeah, so far the ones I've particularly released have all been close to 3, but they're not all that long, I swear. Now, but no, with this, these would be shorter episodes unless otherwise noted. Because actually, there's a few topics I think I might want to cover on this where it'd be like probably like 5 hours. I don't know. But like certain video games I could probably talk about for like 5 hours.
I mean, if you wanted me to do 1 or 2, I would love to do stuff like Project Runway or like In the Cut, like those type of shows that I actually really like. Yeah. That's the only reality TV I'm like addicted. I can't stop. I'm like, how is everyone so talented, so fast? They're so fast at sewing. It's insane. I just marvel every week because I sew and I make costumes, but I'm absolutely a novice. And I've learned a lot watching that show too. I would go on and on. So anyway.
No. I love the sound of that. Again, it's like how, depending on how wide ranging the things end up being, maybe it will start to make sense to even break them up further into separate little side projects. But the idea is that on Patreon, we're gonna have a lot of different types of exclusive content. One of the things I'm saying is, I want these things where we can just kind of cover other sort of pieces of media that, we have a relationship to. And it could be, I could just talk about it solo if it's like something that only I know about or whatever, or we could both talk about it if it's something we're both interested in and we have the time to record it. Or it could be you could record on your own to talk about something like you're saying, like your reality shows, and then put that out there. It could do all the above. But that's not even the only thing that would be on it. The other, I would say, more substantive project that we are going to be working on for the Patreon, and I'll have more details about it in the future once we have them, is kind of to do a sort of, it's the basic premise of it is kind of think of it like the post show. Other shows kind of have that thing with the post show. The only difference is I don't think we necessarily would record it right after this, because we record this typically in the middle of the afternoon on a Wednesday. And the whole theme of this show, as I'm about to explain, would be more like, this is the evening show. This is the late night show, right? So it's like, if this is daytime talk show, this is late night talk show, but like not late night talk show like Jimmy Kimmel or Johnny Carson. Late night talk show like what were those more seedier cable shows where it was like weird stuff would happen. More like
you aspired to pod a seedy cable show.
Yeah. Well, there was those. I'm forgetting some examples, but there were those weird sort of late night variety shows that on like cable channels like MTV or like VH or like they would be weird. They would be or like even like Adult Swim, like with like going even back to like the earliest days with the cartoon like Space Ghost, which was a rip off of Johnny Carson. Or this might even predated Adult Swim. It was like when Cartoon Network basically just had a block they started to call Adult Swim. And it was like they had the show Space Ghost Coast to Coast. And it was like a bizarre,
I remember that.
Yeah, it was like a bizarre animated show using old like Hanna-Barbera like action heroes, but like repurposed as like kind of a Johnny Carson riff, but way weirder. And that's basically where the whole sort of tone and atmosphere for all things Adult Swim kind of came from. And just like that type of thing where it's like there's something kind of weird about what we're doing. Like you're almost like it's a secret. And that was my favorite thing about it. Not that show, because I'd see the ads all the time, I guess. But actually watching it felt like a secret. And then I would channel surf. Like if I was at my grandmother's house, either grandmother, because it was a common thing. Anytime I slept over my grandmother's house, it was good, because old women go to sleep early. And they're not really that concerned with you going to bed as long as you don't put the TV up too loud. So it's just like you could just stay up all night watching cable TV. And that would be like one of my favorite things to do. And I would just like flip through channels and find the weirdest stuff. And I would be like, what the hell is this? And again, the whole ethos of Adult Swim, I think, kind of comes from that same experience that I think a lot of kids and teenagers who, grew up in the 80s and 90s and like early 2000s had, like it just kind of was a thing that
Yeah, I think maybe
experience.
Robot Chicken falls in that category, like all those type of shows. That was on Adult Swim, right?
Yeah, right. So like Adult Swim as a network, when even then it's still technically shares the same channel with the normal Cartoon Network, but it basically, once it created like this sort of like following, it started to create original programming to specifically cater to it, which is what it became. But originally, it kind of almost felt like an accident. You know what I mean? That's kind of what I'm saying. And the
like
whole
these
aesthetic,
are the shows that got rejected, and we just put them on here.
Completely.
No one will notice them on after 10, right? No one will see these.
Exactly.
So we'll just stick them here. It's fine. Again,
it's the stuff for the freaks and the perverts, and like that's why I turned my attention strong to it. And I felt like very like, oh shit, I'm not supposed to see this stuff. Not even because the content was like bad language, although it often was. It's just like, this is so weird. It's too weird for normal people. It's only for people that are like, and again, I didn't understand.
Outliers of society.
Yeah, I didn't really understand drug culture yet, because I'm talking when I was like 8, 9, 10, 11 years old. So I just didn't occur, oh, right, there's a whole bunch of people like stoned or otherwise like drunk or whatever who are up at night all the time. I didn't really get that. I just was like, right, I don't know, normal people are sleeping. So yeah, that whole ethos and like, late night infomercials, like that's what I'm saying. Adult Swim kind of started to use that aesthetic of like infomercials, other things like the whole sort of alternative comedy scene that started to come into it, with like things like Tim and Eric and all that other stuff, and cinema. Yeah, which I've been actually rewatching a bunch of on cinema stuff lately. Probably because we're doing this podcast, and yeah, we are going to get to Nausicaa if anyone is thinking of that right now. I just think it's really important to lay out this picture here with what we're trying to do with the Patreon, and therefore what the aesthetic is that might be coming to it. So take that as your kind of baseline, and then add in a sort of, I think, even because when I think of you, Dana, or when I think of another friend of ours that I'm going to be inviting over to join with us on this project, I'll wait to introduce her to when that's all been settled out. I feel like you guys know how to class up a joint. So it's like, it's not going to be just like the fast food munchie shit. It's going to be much more like cool and elegant and like, so in hip, if you will. So it's much more like you're going to a late night party.
Like a speakeasy.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe that's the
fun.
title. Maybe that's the title. And yeah, to your point with, even your talents with mixology, I'm kind of like, that should play a part in it as well. So this is something we're going to be working on behind the scenes, and it'll be a real supplement to this show. That's why I'm saying it's like the post show, because once we get to a phase where we're bringing on guests and such, I want the guests to kind of cross over. I want it to be like you get your guests to talk the movie that we were talking about this week, and for us to do an interview that's focused on cinema in the main show. But if you want to just get to know them more as a person and watch us have fun and just like kind of talk about anything and everything and hang out and have a cool time, that's what the after show, the post show is about. That's all stuff to look forward to that I'm very excited to be bringing in the future. And once, we have more things settled on it and are able to share, that's when the Patreon will go up. And the goal is to keep everything kind of all under one very low price point, so that it's just, boom, you sign up, you're going to get everything. And hopefully that's all content that you want. But like I said, there's going to be an eclectic mix of things. There might even be other little side projects that will be put up on there, that, you know, maybe not everything appeals to you in every which way, but you'll always have this. And I think this idea of this post show is something that I think really will be quite popular if you give it a chance. Cause I think what you're going to find, look, if you're listening to this, and I imagine that it's not just the movie discussion itself, it's also, you know, feeling like hopefully some sort of connection to us as people. You're going to get a lot more of that. And I'm sure there will be movie talk on the post show as well, just like in kind of different context, you know, much looser and less focused in a good way. Now, at long last, let us talk about Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind. Dana, you had never seen this film before. Talk to me about your experience watching it and what you thought.
Well, honestly, I think I was, first of all, taken aback by how beautiful this film is and how reminiscent it is of movies like Ant-Man that go into smaller dimensions, and you see particles at a much larger size. That's what the spores make me think of.
Yeah.
I definitely immediately was thinking of, also as a current geology student, I was thinking about prehistoric times when plants were much larger than they are now, due to differing oxygen levels in the atmosphere. So it made me think of the Earth having been restarted.
Yes.
That kind of post-apocalyptic feel. I also want to just, you probably know I'm going to say this. You're probably waiting for me to say this. But
there's a few things I'm waiting for you to say.
She reminds me of Rey from Star Wars. She's a scavenger with it even almost looks staff-like, and then you realize it's a rifle. But initially, I was like, wow, okay. She's also kind of MacGyver because she uses her gunpowder to take the eye. You know, it's like, okay, so this is Rey, MacGyver. I mean, it's like on the nose for me.
No, so
as well as the fact that later on, she helps heal the giant creatures that everyone's scared of, just like in Star Wars, Rey helps heal the giant creatures that everyone's scared of. And then the other thing that came to mind for me immediately was The Matrix as well. I got a lot of Matrix vibes in the storyline and in her being the like hero to save them all type of thing in the end. I really enjoyed this movie. I think it was a really good intro to me. To tell me his name. I see Miyazaki's work.
Yes.
Even though technically it's not an introduction to his work, because I have seen Spirited Away.
And you've seen Totoro, right?
And I've seen Totoro. Yeah. But I think this was my first analytical take. Those two I watched very casually. So I did enjoy taking kind of a deeper dive into such a beautiful story. The animation struck me as well.
Oh, yeah.
Part of something, and I wanted to ask you, I bet you, I wanted to see if you thought this was on purpose. So Nausicaa's pants are a flesh color.
Yeah.
And in the first few scenes, I thought she was wearing a skirt.
Right.
Until she flies, and it full on shows her whole butt. And you realize, oh, they're pants. Did you think that was like let's make them think she's not wearing pants? And
I don't know if it's to make you think that she's not wearing pants,
or they just happen to be exactly flesh toned.
So there's a couple things that always keep in mind. So this is fascinating because this is the first animated film we've done and the first Japanese animated film that we've done. And the thing with Japanese animation or anime is, you have to almost, I mean, there's a lot of things, certainly with regards to like, the clothing and and sexuality. But honestly, most of that stuff has nothing to do with this film. What does have to do with this film, that you always have to keep in mind, even though this production and certainly the future Ghibli productions are kind of like that highest caliber of animation and production, anime by its nature is done in a way where things are kept simple on purpose in terms of designs, if you can, or
absolutely. So you can animate quickly.
So you can animate quickly. So one thing, and also because Nausicaa comes from the Nausicaa manga, the comic book, I imagine, I don't know this for a fact, but this is what I'm saying is when you think of anime or you think of this stuff, it's always good to start to frame things from this direction almost first, because if you can figure out the answer just by looking at this, it's probably the right answer. It's kind of like the anime Occam's razor. It's like, if something is just simple to animate, that's probably why it's done that way. So I think with the skirt and the stuff, and it's just like, oh, not designing pants that have wrinkles and flourishes like that just is a lot easier. So I think it was more like, oh, a skirt's easier to animate, but I think Miyazaki was like, but I don't think Nausicaa would wear a skirt. So he kind of split the difference. She looks like she's wearing a skirt, but she's not.
Got it. Interesting. I was wondering what your theory would be on it. And I only bring that up because that's in scene 1. It was like the first thing in my notes. I'm like, pants or no pants?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah, I very much enjoyed this movie. I love that there was obviously another princess involved. And so they get compared, and the men are just in such adoration for Nausicaa.
Yes.
And her ability to not only quell these giant, destructive, angry creatures because she tries to understand them, but she wants to help both sides. She's just the peacemaker here. Mm-hmm. She wants to make sure her kingdom is safe, yes, but also that no one gets hurt, including these animals. Right. So she's just like this wonderful baby nature angel. And I was already planning my cosplay.
Okay, I'm so glad you said that, because I was basically like, I want Dana to come out of this being like, I want to be Nausicaa.
Oh, I already have
the costume.
I have this one outfit I can alter. It can happen very quickly.
Yeah, no, I might have mentioned this before, but one of my favorite all-time Halloween costumes that my sister has done, and she's a person who does have really good Halloween costumes.
She does?
Yes.
We're gonna be friends.
Oh, you're gonna be friends. She's gonna come on the show, and we're gonna do some type of conversation.
Your sister.
Well, one of the favorite things she ever did was because we're going to talk about this movie a little bit as well, just because of all the Miyazaki films, these two have the most similarities, I'd say. And there's a lot of similarities across all of them, which we'll also talk about. But Princess Mononoke, she was San, aka Princess Mononoke, for Halloween, and her costume was like perfect. Like she had the fur, the everything, the headband, the short brown hair. I don't think I can't remember if she put like blood on her mouth or not, because that's the thing. You'll see, and it's like literally the poster of the movie is her. She one of her giant dire wolves gets a bullet in it, and so she like sucks the blood out of the wound with her mouth, and then like she turns, and it's like the first time you see her in the film, and she like wipes her mouth off with the blood, so there's like this smear, and she's giving this harsh scowl because that's her whole character. She's the wolf girl. She's fierce. She's just like, I don't like, even though she is human, she's like, I don't fuck with other humans. When I see other humans, I hate them. So she, raised by wolves girl basically is the premise. Amazing. Yeah. But yeah, there's a lot of similarities between these films. In fact, to the point where I call Princess Mononoke, I call Princess Mononoke almost like a remake of Nausicaa in some ways. From from the perspective of Nausicaa, I would say Princess Mononoke is, or it's the pre-make to Princess Mononoke, which I actually think is a better way to describe it too, because I don't think Miyazaki's like, oh, let Princess Mononoke just be a Nausicaa rehash. Not even close. I just think that by the time he makes Princess Mononoke, he's just such a more competent and experienced filmmaker that he can't help it but make a movie that's similar, but by every means, like just superior, which is the other thing I wanted to say starting up front. I'm really glad we're doing this film. I think it's going to give us a lot to talk about it. I thought of a lot of Miyazaki films, like you would really appreciate it because of the sci-fi, because of the hero's 100%. Journey, Star Wars stuff. Yeah, absolutely. But I think, it's kind of like it's one of his earlier works. And I think his films that he made later are just like leagues above it in many ways. Which isn't to say this movie's bad. This movie's really freaking good, and I had a great time watching it. But I always thought that, and because I saw all these Miyazaki films as they would come out on DVD, and they came out on DVD in the U.S. out of order. So it's like I saw Mononoke and Spirited Away, way before I saw this one, as I think most Americans did. And when you see this one, you're like, oh, this now makes so much sense where this is coming from. Because I was very into it. Like I watched all the bonus features first. So I understood the story that I'm going to tell about how this movie got made and stuff. I understood all that. So it made sense to me. I wasn't like surprised. And I was very excited to see it because I was like, wow, this is like the first one. Awesome. So I was like excited about it that way. But it was like, oh, right. I could see that this is like the beta version or the like alpha build of a lot of things that you're going to see later in some of his other films do like much more nuanced and which is hilarious for me to say, because one thing you'll notice about Miyazaki right away in this film is that he's so nuanced and so like thinking about everything from every angle. I mean, that's one of the things that structurally and in terms of like the characters, because it's really the characters more than anything else that is like Mononoke. You'll see it's like oh right, he's doing the same things. It's like almost like it's like Nausicaa kind of only takes it 80%, whereas Princess Mononoke takes it 110%. You know what I mean? Like that's kind of how I look at it. And I think it's just like the animation is so much more sophisticated as well. Which some people. I could see some people like preferring the earlier, more simple look of a movie like Nausicaa, because that's the thing. As you get more animators, as you get the introduction of computer technology, and Mononoke was the first film to have access to that, you get more sophisticated things. And I think that things he does in Mononoke
the style
are amazing.
evolves over the years.
The style evolves over the years. Though
I think like any artist.
Yeah. Compared to other anime filmmakers and like manga artists, like Miyazaki's style is like one of the most consistent. And I think that's, if I had to guess, I'd say that's less to do with him as an artist and more to do with the sort of like godlike reverence that people who work at his studio must have for him, that they're like, we must make sure we never deviate from this very specific like incredibly well-known style and brand, like, you know what I mean? Which, it is fair, now they have deviated like from it, and it's
to be fair, they have deviated, and I think that's to be expected. You can't do exactly the same thing all the time. Even if you try, it won't turn out exactly the same. And I think his, or at least the works that I've seen, the earlier stuff tends to me to think of watercolor paintings. I always think of the palettes that he picks make me think of watercolor.
Yes.
And that's, probably because when I was younger, I studied art history and I looked at a lot of watercolors for a long, long time. And I think not only the palette that he chooses, but sometimes even the edges of his works make me think of layered watercolor. Beautiful.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that watercolor painting influence that you're referring to is another thing that remains consistent. And I do think that particular aspect of it is less like just a branding exercise. More what I was talking about there is just like the way he designs faces, or even reusing specific faces, which is something we're going to talk about. is what is more that thing that seems like a
features all
branding.
seem very similar.
The features all seem very similar.
I kind of thought that's sort of a general anime thing, whereas I mean, you can watch different anime across the board, and they all have similar features.
Well, okay, so I want to touch on that a little bit, which is because it'll make what I just said about the style of Ghibli and specifically Miyazaki Ghibli so consistent. Is like, yes, like of course there's certain things about it that just are anime in the way most people would understand anime, but like I said, Nausicaa is a film from 1984 from a manga that started in 1982. So
we were both negative years old.
We were both negative years old. Thank you for making sure people know we're not that
crazy.
Old. But
no, I just
No, but I mean, look, no, I think about this because I've watched many anime from this period and before I was born. There are trends across the spectrum that kind of go through the decades, right? So every show and artist has their own style, and there's always a wide diversity of styles at any time. But there are some overarching trends, and they shift over time, and they're usually influenced by whoever's the biggest influence of the time, right?
That makes sense. I mean, they're the trendsetter.
In the 80s, Miyazaki and the Ghibli look is actually, on the one hand, a product of the look that was very popular, actually going back even to the 70s and some of the stuff that we're going to talk about Miyazaki was doing then. That style kind of persists. Then it evolves, and by the time you get to the 90s, it's really, and you can see the influence that, you know, something like Nausicaa might have had on it, or certain things like Lupin the Third might have had on it. But the sort of Akira Toriyama, like Dragon Ball Z kind of style becomes very, very prevalent. That influences a lot of things. And then, you know, once you get to the 2000s and 2010s, it's other things which are, you know, I'm not even gonna get into because I'm not really the expert on that sort of period. Like most of my stuff is, you know, again, rooted in the 90s or earlier. But yeah, but Studio Ghibli, because it's been a studio that's been going through all these years and has tried to maintain that consistency and cater to the beloved style, right? This is like, that's what I'm saying. Like Japan as a culture, as a consumer culture, much more so than America, though I think America's catching up because think how much nostalgia generates around here. Japan is very tradition oriented. So
yes,
in other words, yeah, I mean, in every way, but like it affects even things like the way people view older franchises. Like, and this impacts, you know, things like I mentioned Toriyama's work, and his work also encompasses designing characters for the video game series Dragon Quest, which is one of the most popular video game series in Japan. And because of that, when a Dragon Quest game comes out, the first thing people want to see is they want to see that Toriyama's doing the art, and they want to see that the art looks like how they think it should look and feels like Dragon Quest. It should not change. There's a very hard resistance to change. Like, so if some other artist did it, or Toriyama's style changed too radically, too quickly. Now, Toriyama himself has such personal reverence, as does Miyazaki, that he can get away with doing more or less whatever he wants, and people will be like, well, it has his name on it, so it's good by default. But if someone else came along, and this is what happens because these men are old now. Miyazaki's a very old man now, which I also think is important to point out. You know, Japan has one of the most healthy and active elderly populations, and Miyazaki's one of them. Came out of retirement, is going to be making a new film that's going to be coming out. So
wow,
yeah.
Well, so I think a lot of that also has to do with their culture. Like they have a lot of reverence and respect for older people, and want to help them. Whereas our culture, I think we've lost a lot of that.
Absolutely, we have. Well, you know, that's the thing about it. So I wasn't planning on talking too much about the Miyazaki retirement stuff because I imagine one day
we're gonna watch it.
We're gonna talk about like The Wind Rises or something. We're gonna talk about that period. Or you know what I would really like to cover? I was almost tempted to watch it again before this recording, but I didn't have time. Is It's on HBO Go. I don't know if you looked through that, by the way. On HBO Go, they have the whole Ghibli hub, and it includes documentaries. Yeah. So included is the documentary at the mountains, or at the in the Mountains of Dreams and Madness, something like that.
Cool.
Yeah, it's an amazing title. That is in the Kingdom of Dreams and Madness, and I don't want to get it confused with the H.P. Lovecraft thing, but it's a play on that. That documentary is about the original retirement and the making of The Wind Rises, and Isao Takahata, who we're going to talk about, was also making his final film at the same time. And it was kind of like about like this sort of bittersweet thing where it's like, you know, these men have created amazing films. They're trying to make their last films their masterpieces, both of them at the same time. Studio Ghibli is as productive and working harder than ever, but it's like, do we have a future once these guys leave us? And a lot of it has to do with not just a sort of struggle to foster new talent. It has to do with the fact that, again, there's this reverence for these guys that's hard to replace. And there's this emphasis on tradition, and nostalgia and tradition in Japan go hand in hand. So it's like, if you grew up with Nausicaa, then you're not going to like, you're not only like, oh, I have nostalgia for it. You also have this like, but it better be exactly the same. And I have this deep reverence for it. And if you aren't the same, it's not just, it's not just that you're not serving my nostalgia. It's like you're being blatantly disrespectful and dishonoring the legacy of this honored and revered person. So there's like that whole thing. It plays a heavy weight, and it makes it very hard for new talents and this is a widespread problem. I think
people take it personally.
Animation. People take it personally, but just what it really comes down to is the way it's very hard for new talent to break out. Now, Miyazaki has a complicated thing because his son, Goro Miyazaki, is a director at Ghibli. And I don't know if you saw this in the hub. They have the film Hedwig, or that's not a Hedwig. It sounds like Hedwig in the Angry Itch, but it's Earwig in the whatever, in the Witch. And that's the first fully CG Ghibli movie. And I don't know everything about the way Japan reacted to it, but I know even in the West, Americans reacted to it much like how I imagine Japanese would react to it, which is they were like, how dare you? How fucking dare you make a CG movie, Ghibli? This is a disgrace and a disrespect. And Goro, shame on you. Your father's embarrassed by you. He hates you. There's a lot. I feel if there's one person I feel very bad for, it's Goro Miyazaki, because if you watch the Miyazaki documentary, or you've seen documentaries about other, Japanese icons' relationships with their sons and elderly age, like Jiro Dreams of Sushi, about the sushi chef Jiro and his son who's working under him in a restaurant. It's so hard for those sons to get anything other than scorn. Like this is it's a big problem.
Oh my gosh! Wow.
Yeah. It's just incredibly difficult
such
because
a big shadow. It's tough.
Yeah. Well, it's exacerbated also by the fathers themselves, and Miyazaki's absolutely included. And I love Miyazaki. I think, going by his films, he's someone who I agree with, who I think's heart's in the right place, has incredible passion for humanity. But that doesn't mean he's a perfect person. And a lot of what you see in the documentary in the Kingdoms of Dreams of Madness is just like how nihilistic and pessimistic and negative this guy can be. And how like it drains people around him and it drains himself all the time. And I can't imagine, I guess, that being that guy's son, and then also on top of everything else in Japanese culture, where it's like, you have to honor me by being as good as me, but you can never be as good as me because that would be dishonoring me. So it's like this catch-22.
You're only allowed to be almost as good as me.
Almost as good as me, good enough to not ever embarrass me, which is, again, impossible. But like, until I die, you're not allowed to be better than me. And even then you never will be. It's a really weird thing. But that being said, I think I personally don't have that much affinity for the Goro films I've seen. I haven't seen all of them. But hopefully his future career ends up being good. And I also, Hayao Miyazaki Sr., I hope he, continues to make films until, his last day. I will see what comes of it. But even if he doesn't, even if this film he's been working on never comes out, and I feel like it never is, it's just great to have had the career he's had. Okay. No, something else you brought up that I want to talk about, this bringing it back down to just Nausicaa for this conversation, is Nausicaa, Ghibli as a whole, but certainly Nausicaa, and we're going to talk about Nausicaa's predecessor in a similar way. These things are influential in such a way that there's a lot of speculation that has gone on the internet where it's like, this is definitely taking this sequence from this Ghibli movie or this from Nausicaa, whether it's been directly stated to or not. Like, people are just convinced by this because it's like overwhelming. And we know that a lot of filmmakers, including J.J. Abrams, are 100% have seen all the Miyazaki films. And like, you know what I mean? Like, so when you talk about Rey in Star Wars, 100% Rey in Star Wars is a take on Nausicaa. Like, people were pointing this out since the first trailer for The Force Awakens drops. They were even doing one-to-one comparisons of that opening sequence.
Wow.
She's like to say, yeah. So the mask, the look, the goggles, all that stuff. So that's one example.
It immediately came to my mind. So,
but the connections between Nausicaa and Star Wars go far beyond that, and go far beyond just even the immediate. Like, in a weird way, I would say the connections that we're going to talk about almost give JJ license to rip it off if he so chooses. But yeah, I think before we get into that as well, I want to start talking about it because you didn't mention. I was kind of curious if you would or not. But I think a good place to start, because I assume you watched the film with in the English language, right? Or did you watch in Japanese with subtitles?
Oh no, I 100% had English on, and I was trying to figure out which actors were who.
Yeah,
voices.
That's what I was going to talk about.
But when I looked it up on IMDb, and I was lazy, I just looked it up once. It showed me the original voices, and I was like, "Oh well, this is not the subtitled version."
Oh, you mean the Japanese? Okay, yes. So, with all credit to the Japanese cast, who is fantastic, and I have watched the film in the original language before. But the way I was introduced to the film and the way I mostly watch it is in English, with the dub cast that Disney put together. So that's another thing we have to talk about just briefly.
It's Disney's cast.
Yeah. So Ghibli, the rights to Ghibli in America became Disney's around the time, or right before. No, it was like in the mid 90s. So the first film that really come
that early.
Was Mononoke, which, given the content of Mononoke, wasn't fit for Disney's branding, so they released it through Miramax, which Disney owned at the time. Which is also means that, the Weinstein brothers were very involved in the English release of Mononoke, so that's unfortunate, but it was what happened. All right. So yes, Bob and Harvey were producers on that film. But yeah, then Spirited Away, which was the follow-up to Mononoke, different story. And that was where, not because they knew how good the film was, Disney got super involved in promoting it. And that was through another unfortunate person, given what has been revealed in this post-Me Too era. But John Lasseter, who was the head of Pixar. And Pixar and Disney were basically merging into one company around this time. And John Lasseter is an obsessive fan of Miyazaki and tried to become personal friends with him, or kind of was, I guess. No idea on Miyazaki's comment on what's happened with Lasseter since. I doubt he would ever dignify himself to respond to it, though I think a more younger, modern person might, Things are changing. But, old school Japanese culture is you would just never talk about that. And Miyazaki does not give interviews or comments typically. Now, yeah, so John Lasseter and Miyazaki went around promoting Spirited Away in the film festival circuit. It won the Venice Film Festival's best prize, the Golden Bear. So it was a huge deal as a film and when it was coming out. it would go on to win the Academy Award for Best Animated Picture. And, following that, you get Howl's Moving Castle a few years later. And pretty much between Spirited Away and Howl's Moving Castle, and a little bit after that, Disney really took the time to, because of the popularity of Spirited Away, go back through the entire catalog of Ghibli films, particularly Miyazaki's films, but also the Isao Takahata and other filmmakers' films in the Ghibli library. They went through it and released them or re-released them with all new dubs onto DVD. And these new dubs, were done with a very, very high-end cast of actors. Like, they really wanted to promote the shit out of it.
Did they remaster any of the animation or just do the voices?
No, just the voices, because
I would think so.
I remember very clearly. Yeah, there's because like I said, I used to watch every single little bonus feature on these DVDs. So I very distinctly remember, like, one of the things that was a huge factor in the deal with Disney was you're not allowed to alter the films in any way. Which is great. Great for us to get the films properly. Great for the films, and I think even great for Disney, because I think they want to seem like they are the animators. Like that, the whole point of this deal was optically as well, to really solidify this idea that Ghibli was Japanese Disney. And this was great for them because, Disney was trying to expand in Japan and do Disney World Japan and all these things. And now actually Studio Ghibli has its own theme park as well, by the way, in Japan.
They do?
Yes, which I can't imagine how amazing that is.
Wow.
Yeah, where you just like ride the Totoro coasters and stuff.
Oh my gosh. Now I want to go.
Bus. I don't know too much about it, honestly. I should look more into it, but it's probably amazing. I know they have like the giants, that you see in this film. They have all that stuff. And the giants actually is a statue on Studio Ghibli's actual campus where their studio is. But yeah, so Disney and Ghibli have this relationship that stretches back, a long time. But it wasn't until really after Spirited Away that they started to release everything onto DVD, because the DVD market was also big at the time. They got these very high profile casts for pretty much every film. That's why, you get the Porco Rosso with Michael Keaton. But this cast in particular, let's talk about them for Nausicaa. So as Lord, what's his name? The main old guy with the big mustache. He is played by Patrick Stewart, Sir Patrick Stewart. So you're going to notice a trend with some of the other people I'm going to name. Like these are your homies, because Disney knew what they were doing. They wanted to cast people that were big in sci-fi stuff. So Patrick Stewart, obviously Picard from Star Trek Next Generation, right? They have as the Pegite leader, they have Mark Hamill, Luke Skywalker himself.
Is that his voice?
Yes,
I didn't recognize
absolutely.
his voice.
Well, he's doing kind of like one of his it's not quite his like Joker voice, but it's like it sounds a lot like Last Jedi Luke if you listen to it.
Okay.
Yeah. Then you have rounding it out on that sci-fi triumvirate. So you have Star Trek, Star Wars, and who's the third in that triumvirate? Battlestar Galactica. So you have Edward James Olmos.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
That's the voice I recognize. I thought it sounded like him.
Yes, who's also in Blade Runner, of course. Right. So in addition to that, you have the one, the only, I'm surprised you didn't recognize her voice and we're like, is it that? Uma Thurman as Kushana, the Empress.
Okay, it sounded like to me?
Who?
I would have guessed Terry Hatcher.
Ooh, interesting. I mean,
the sound like have you seen?
I don't know.
Coraline?
Terry Hatcher sounds much more like airy and like Uma Thurman has that. What? Have I seen what?
Coraline.
That's true, but that was later.
It's an animated movie, and
no, I've seen Coraline.
but her voice sounded like Terry Hatcher in Coraline. So I thought I was like, is it?
Okay, well, I don't know. Maybe obviously
I thought about looking it up, but then I thought it would be more fun for you to tell me.
I know, but here, no, it is more fun for me to tell people, but I'm just surprised because, like, in my head, like, yes, I knew it was Uma Thurman the whole time, but like,
I did not. I thought it was Terry Hatcher in my mind the whole time.
It's such amazing casting because she delivers her lines like she's in Kill Bill. It's like she's like, you won't touch that. Like she's like just very like intense and like you're like, oh shit, this lady will fuck you up. So it's like perfect casting. Like she's deadly as hell. And then at the time when this dub was made, he was still like a kid and not the big star he would become very shortly after. But Shia LaBeouf plays what's his name? The Asbel, the Pedgite kid. And lastly, as Nausicaa herself, you have Alison Tolman, who you might remember was the girl in the film Matchstick Men.
I've seen bits of Matchstick Men, but I don't think I've seen it all the way through.
Yeah, it's a movie I'm pretty sure I've seen the whole thing of, but it was something I mainly know from watching HBO, a decade ago. But yeah, no, she's great. Her performance as Nausicaa in this film is honestly one of the absolute best performances of anybody in these Ghibli movies, I think. Like, she does a lot. Like, when Nausicaa cries in this movie, and it happens a few times, like, you feel it, in my opinion. Like, you really feel it. Yeah, I mean, ditto the whole cast. I don't think, like, if you listen to the dub for Princess Mononoke, which obviously just being a much better written and constructed movie in general, like, that film with Billy Crudup and Claire Danes and Billy Bob Thornton.
Billy Crudup.
Yeah, he plays the main character, Ashitaka. That's, like, the best dub probably ever. Like, and I'm not speaking in terms of, like, pure, like the I'm talking about the performances of the actors entirely.
Okay.
But I as far as I know, the translation is like, it's striking the right balance. I think all these Disney dubs do. Like, because they can't change it. Like, they're very faithful, but they also are not like too restrictive. They change words around to make them sound natural in English, which is what you should do.
Yeah, that's why you need a translator, because things don't sound, if you directly translate things, they don't make sense.
Yeah, exactly. But a lot of dubs sometimes do that. One, because it's a little easier, but two, it's like it's to kind of appease fans who are like incredibly demanding of like, you need to be this accurate. And look, if you were talking about like an anime TV series that has like a very dense lore, and like you want to make sure everything is like received correctly, it can be helpful to have like an incredibly literal translation. Like one thing that
I can see that.
Yeah. I don't know. Like, well, I don't know though. I've seen arguments the other way of like, who cares about that? Like, what's important?
Well, probably depends on what it is culturally. Like, if you say something to an American in English, but then you say the same thing to an Englishman in English, it might mean two different things.
True, but I think look, as an actor, you probably appreciate this. I think it's more like a debate between making things sound natural versus making sure that details and plot and like cultural norms from another country are preserved. And this is what's tricky about it, because on the first 2 points,
getting the intent across.
Getting the intent. Yeah, it is actually a tricky thing that I think there's not one answer to. I think different movies or different shows should require a slightly different approach depending on what's important. And then brings a problem because different people have different interpretations of what's important. Often now, because everything is just moving in a direction of being far more international. I mean, as someone who grew up with this stuff, it's been very interesting to see how things have changed in video games or in animation, with stuff, how it moves from Japan to the US and vice versa even. Now it's much more easy to kind of do either approach really and kind of because people are so much more familiar now with the certain cultural things. Like if you see a Japanese film, whether it's subtitled or dubbed, and they're using the honorifics like san or sama or senpai, I feel like a lot more people are more likely to be used to that, okay with that, and even understand it. Like understand that Japan is a culture where these are really important because everything's hierarchical. Like if I'm even like the weirdest thing is you see it a lot is like if I'm a high school student in Japan, if I'm a senior and you're a junior or a sophomore, you are supposed to like have a reverence for me as if I was not a teacher literally, but closer to that than another student. Like we're not considered peers really, which is weird because we're like, we might even be months apart or even like in some cases, I could be even older than you technically.
Yeah.
But like they use the term senpai, which if I remember I learned these terms actually from doing karate as a kid growing up.
Yeah, me too. I learned them in martial arts doing karate.
Right. So if you were a certain degree of black belt, you were to be called senpai. But really, under the traditional Japanese culture, any rank above you would be your senpai.
Any rank above you is senpai. Yeah.
Right. So and obviously, if you're an actual teacher, then you're sensei.
Sensei.
Right? Yes. So and the other ones like san and kun and jo, like they're all different. Like kun is for like, you know, related to people that are considered peers. Like I would call you Dana kun, like right.
Yeah.
But like you know, it's interesting. Anyway, I don't want to get too bogged down into that because that's a whole nother thing. But I think that the point is that now we're more used to these things. When Disney was making these dubs, people really weren't. And so any examples of using that terminology is not in these dubs. However, I think for the most part, I guess certain exceptions might be things like The Wind Rises or Totoro. But most of or I guess Princess Mononoke, but most of Miyazaki's work is not set in Japan. You know what I mean? So it's like, it's usually a fantastical setting of some kind or a European setting even deliberately. So it wouldn't actually make sense for anyone. I mean, like you're going to still hear it in the Japanese language version of it. But like if you're going to translate Porco into English, there's no point in preserving Japanese honorific structure. Like, you know what I mean? Like that actually doesn't make any cultural sense. So that's what I mean when I say that like one set of rules is not one size fits all. Like everything requires a different approach to it. But okay. Yeah, that was a good little primer on that. Another thing that you didn't mention in your recap, but I think is absolutely probably my favorite part of this movie, if I'm being honest. My absolute favorite part of this movie is the music, the score by Joe Hisaishi. And,
it's beautiful.
Oh, yeah. Yes, absolutely. Right from the opening of the film, like that opening overture for the title sequence is like maybe one of my favorite pieces of music of all time in anything.
Gave me Never-Ending Story vibes.
Yes.
Like they would be on the same playlist, you know?
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's another 80s fantasy product, so that makes sense.
Well, the music specifically made me think of the music.
No, I know, but that's when, but like these things, there was a certain sort of ethos. And it's really interesting. So Joe Hisaishi, who's one of my favorite, and apologies if I'm not pronouncing your name correctly, Joe, but Joe Sama or San. Oh, he's almost a Sama. I feel like he's like godlike. Sama's basically for like emperors and gods
above,
or high lords. But you know, like this is his first collaboration with Miyazaki. So Miyazaki only had one feature film before this, which we're going to talk about coming up. But this was their first collaboration. He would go on to collaborate with him on every subsequent film. And so his scores, his music is synonymous with Miyazaki's work. And it's, to me, incredibly vital. I mean, he's like the second most important person next to Miyazaki himself in terms of like what makes a Miyazaki film a Miyazaki film. It's 100% that music. And his music styles has evolved and grown, like, and changed with times. Like in the 80s, when this film came out, and this, I think, is where it connects to your never ending story thing. He was using a lot of synths, which was very popular at the time. And I really like his synth work in this film.
It's popular now again.
It is. That's true. And you know what? Another, you can tell another influence on Hisaishi, which just ties into something else that we love to bring up. Oh my God. We've already brought it up because of another connection, but he's very inspired by Blade Runner and what Vangelis did, because one of the things that Vangelis did in Blade Runner is not obviously just use synths, but he brought in the, sort of like Indian and Southeast Asian, like kind of instrumentation with like, sitars and stuff. And that you hear that in Nausicaa as well. That's another little connection there. But yeah, Joe's scores have kind of evolved. Like if we do Castle in the Sky, that's the follow up to Nausicaa. There's a lot of synth in that. That one in the dub also features Mark Hamill, which is cool. And then, but once you get, I'm trying to think how much synth is really in Totoro or Kiki, a little bit. But once you get to Porco, it's like there's no synth. Porco is where it goes all jazz. And then pretty much after that, it is more jazz or classical infused, which I think is my personal preference. But I do have a lot of love for the more synth style. And look, obviously when I talk about the opening overture, that's not synth. That's like these big orchestral flourishes. So he was always doing that. That's always been a part of it. But I think one of my early things, I think it came after Nausicaa, but it's another 80s anime film, not by Miyazaki or anybody related to Ghibli, but this film called Venus Wars. And the opening track of Venus Wars.
It's animated?
Yeah, it's animated. It's a really cool movie. Maybe we'll cover it sometime, or I'll cover it on the bonus feed for the patrons at least. But Venus Wars is super fucking cool. And Venus Wars is like, it's another sci-fi film, so you would like it. But one of the things I really love about it is this opening piece of music, and it's very synth heavy. It's like super cool fucking 80s style synth. It's like and then it just bangs, and then it seamlessly moves from that into this very like cool, like kind of sexy, funky, like jazz thing. So it's got both things at the same time. And it's fucking just dope. And I love it so much that, not to give the game away, I really, really, really have this ambition to license it out for this scene in a movie that I wrote. So yeah, I want to get that piece of music in a future movie, like Tarantino style. It's like, but you didn't know that music was from Venus Wars. It's an amazing piece of music.
You could probably give the sheet music to someone that we know and have them do a cover.
Yeah, no, I know, but again, in that Tarantino way, it's like, I don't want a cover. I want the original thing. I want it right from my record. Like, I literally have the record. I want it played directly from my record and put into the movie.
You gotta pay for it, Marcus.
I know.
It's expensive.
But but that's the kind of the point is like, I think this is something that I think about is like, movie music, like great movie music, it can get a little lost to time because it is just so attached to this movie and siloed there. And like, I think it's good to try to get it out there more when it's, so people remember it and come back to it and visit the original film.
It's powerful. Sometimes a song can be used in a movie and it takes it over for you. And now you only think of that movie when you hear that song.
Yeah. So we talked about the dub. We talked about the dub cast. But now I want to just also mention the actual characters themselves in terms of something that I find to be, important that I've already kind of touched on, which is how this film is kind of like the direct predecessor to Princess Mononoke. And one of the ways you can see that really, really, really clearly, and I know you haven't seen Mononoke yet, so I'm going to try to like go through this without spoiling too much, but hopefully it'll just whet your appetite to watch Mononoke. Is the characters, there's like a lot of one-to-ones almost. So starting what I already mentioned her, the character Uma Thurman plays, Kushana. She's the biggest one. Kushana is basically the same as the Mononoke character, Lady Eboshi. They're both even drawn quite similarly. I would actually include her in something else I'm going to talk about right after this, which is this sort of like almost reusing of faces or bodies as though they're actors playing different parts across the films, even though it's all animated, right? So Kushana and Lady Eboshi, like some of the things they have in common.
Right.
Both their goals are quite literally to burn down the jungle or burn down the forest. They're both ambitious women leaders that like command a bunch of men, but they're women and they're like big women. That's what I'm saying. They're drawn the same. They're like tall, broad-shouldered women. Then they're also notably very wise. They're strategists, but at the same time, their weaknesses, they're incredibly ignorant in certain ways, and their ignorance. It's either that they're incredibly ignorant or incredibly cynical. And I would say from the perspective of Miyazaki, those two things are the same thing. Like their type of cynicism is cynicism out of ignorance. It's like this indifference to the planet, this indifference to violence. It's like, oh, well, who cares? Whatever, everyone's violent. It's like, no, that's an ignorant way of looking at it. Right. So there's that. But other than that key flaw, they're shown to be incredibly wise and competent and strategic. Right. And then another thing is Kushana has a prosthetic arm. And this is a little bit of a spoiler, but Eboshi loses an arm at some point in that film, Mononoke. Then lastly, there's another key feature that's very noticeable. I'm sure you must have thought about this. I'm curious what you felt. In both cases, while the characters are essentially constructed to be the quote villain or a villain, they're the more you get to know them, the more screen time they have, the more you're like, are they a villain? And one of the ways this plays with your perception of are they a villain is they spend a lot of time speaking in admiration and respect for the protagonist. Like they basically like, oh, I love, like in Kushana's case, she coughed and talks about, I want to meet Nausicaa. I want to talk to Nausicaa. Nausicaa's really good. We have to save Nausicaa. Like she's obsessed with Nausicaa. Similarly, Lady Eboshi is like, Ashitaka would be my best warrior. I love Ashitaka. Ashitaka's smart, blah, blah, blah. So like, there's this thing where they are like, almost like, there's like this deep respect and admiration. It's like, yes, we have differences and yes, we are kind of on opposing sides, but I respect you and I really like you. It's like weird.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think it's weird. I think what it is this is something that's broader. It's like kind of part of the broader Miyazaki-isms that we're going to talk about that's very different than like Western cinema and certainly Western like action hero journey stuff is they don't treat villains like these dark forces of evil. That's not how Miyazaki constructs things. He's first and foremost a humanistic filmmaker. So he believes that everybody's flawed. Everybody is flawed. Everybody has the potential to do good. Everyone has the potential to do bad. And it's just a matter of like what your perspective is and where you exist on this hierarchy or continuum and what choices you're willing to make or not make. Right. So, you know, he doesn't look at like Eboshi or Kushana like they're these evil people. He might look at them as like they are responsible for death and violence and that's evil. But he also looks at them as human beings with their own intentions and hearts and are capable of saying nice things to other people, are capable of having respect for other people, are capable of being very loving and generous with other people. It's just a matter of who those people are and who they aren't, right? And part of the way he separates his, quote, heroes is that they tend to be characters that are willing to kind of approach all people, regardless of where they're coming from, with an equal degree of empathy, right? So that brings us to the next comparable, which is Nausicaa is very much like the prototype, even though one's actually male and one's female, very much like the prototype for Ashitaka, who's the main hero of Princess Mononoke. And like their kind of central key trait in both of them is their calm. They believe in fighting with things with a calmness, like saying, no, just calm down. no, let's talk this through. Let's be reasonable. Let's like, I'm willing to like, and they both risk their physical lives in that kind of, like, there's the scene where towards the end where Nausicaa is like got her hands out, like even gets shot. Very similar scene in Princess Mononoke where Ashitaka stands between two people holding guns and he ends up getting shot. So there's this very sort of self-sacrificing thing.
There's even another little inkling of her self-sacrifice when she meets her baby fox. And
yes, that's one of the first things you see.
The fox bites her finger and she lets it because she knows it's just scared and he doesn't know what to do. When he realizes that she's not going to fight back, she's not going to hurt him. Now she has an ally for life. She has a new little shoulder pet, an adorable fox.
No, that's exactly right. I think what's really important, and that's why I noted that scene happens incredibly early in the film, is that's kind of almost setting up the entire thesis for what I'm talking about. Because Mononoke, from what I remember, doesn't necessarily feature the same thing, but it's like almost taking, again, it's like treating this as a continuum, because what Miyazaki's trying to point out with this, and it is something you learn from nature. It's something you learn from dealing with animals, and you can almost deal with it. Now, a lot of people are very cruel to animals, but the people that aren't, right, one of the things they recognize about animals is that animals are just forces in nature. They're neither good nor bad. They just react to things as they see them. And so if you want an animal to not be hostile, you have to treat it in a way that's calm, which sometimes means giving it space to be hostile to you until it accepts that that's not necessary, right? So, and you'll notice that Lord Yupa, that's what it is. Lord Yupa thinks it's like Nausicaa has some special power. She doesn't have some special power. She just understands how nature works in ways that most of mankind has seemingly forgotten, which is very much Miyazaki's point. And it's not just nature, because man is part of nature too. That's what I'm saying. So Nausicaa treats these warring factions the same way she treats the little fox squirrel, and ditto Ashitaka. You just need to calm down. I mean, I guess the similar beat in Mononoke, because again, you think about it, you'll always find similar beats. There's so many. Is less with any animal, but more with San, the princess, who, as I said, is this wolf girl. She's like trying to like cut him and bite at him and stuff, and he's just like very calmly like, I'm not gonna move. I'm just gonna relax and wait till you relax. You know? Yeah. So there's a lot of power in that. So it's kind of bridging to the next point that's like a big commonality point and a big theme of this film is both Nausicaa and Ashitaka, their role in the story, like the way they're a hero, is they're pleading for peace between these two warring factions. Right. In this film, it's the Tolmekians versus the Pedgites, and the Valley of the Wind people are just kind of in the middle. And in Mononoke, it's between the forest gods and the humans who are trying to burn down the forest, basically. So they're like, both sides believe like that they are right, that they have the right to fight back, that is what they're doing. Like even the ones that are being clearly more offensive. And I think in both cases, in both films, the film is not afraid to show you who's the real offender here, but it doesn't matter, because at the end of the day, both sides think they're the ones, and that's everything's perception, and it's all bullshit, because even no matter who did what first, even if you could sort that out, it doesn't justify the violence. Right. And that's the problem, is that people get so caught up in that self like narcissistic, basically tribal, and in the negative way of thinking that everything is about like, oh, but they wronged me. I mean, we see this all over our politics today.
It becomes less about the issue and more about the grudge. And I think a lot of us can identify with that within our own families and within our own friend groups.
Exactly.
People that focus on the fact that they feel wronged rather than the incident itself and where it stems from.
Well, part of the reason it's so contagious, because I think on a personal, like individual level, which we do see, when all this takes root from the individual. So yeah, you do see it in your family. You do see it in all these things. In the personal individual, there is like a genuine feeling of, I was wronged, I was this. where you see it in our politics today, or where you see it in other larger areas with group contexts, it's that, but it's like, it's really almost like hacking that in a fucked up way, because what it really is like people realize that sharing grievances is like a great way to unite a group, but it's a great way to unite a group for nefarious ends, because it is the mechanism of war and violence and genocide and all sorts of hatred, because it's saying you are wronged. It's like they constantly beat you down with this message. You're being wronged. And so you're like, I'm being wronged? Well, not everything in my life's perfect, so you must be right. I am being wronged. And then you realize you're united with all these people who also like, yeah, we're all being wronged. They're like, yeah, we are. And now you have this group think that's not built off of any type of love, empathy, or compassion. It's built off of we're united by we feel like we're wrong. So what are we going to do about it? Let's burn down this village. Let's fucking build weapons of mass destruction. Let's slit people's throats. Let's never let this grudge go. That's the disease right there. And again, this film is all about that. But yeah, moving on to just a few more points about the comparables and the characters. So another thing that you see in Nausicaa, both Nausicaa and Ashitaka, and this is what I mean about even the hero characters, Miyazaki tries to show that they're flawed. An early thing that happens with Nausicaa is when the Tolmekians are assaulting the valley and they kill her father, what does she do? She grabs her sword and starts fighting, and she even goes for a kill swipe before Lord Yupa steps in, and he does what Nausicaa would later do, sacrifice his own body. Like he gets stabbed in the arm. That was a real badass moment, though. He's just like unflinching, getting stabbed in the arm. But that was the thing. And you'll notice a very particular Miyazaki-ism, and this is an animation thing. When Nausicaa gets angry in that moment, do you notice how her hair starts to like move upwards? Yes. Like it's defying gravity. Like it's like moving with her eyebrows as she like scowls. That's a
always
Miyazaki.
Been one of my favorite thing about even like Dragon Ball Z had that.
Yes.
Where like people would get angry and all of a sudden they were Beyonce standing in front of a fan. You know what I mean?
100%. Well, it's hard for me to say that Miyazaki invented this in anime, but like I think
it's amazing and I love it.
His examples of it are the ones.
Can we please do this in real life? Can we please do a shot? I just get angry and like my hair.
I want that to be, that's why I love it so much, because I want that to be what does happen in real life, but unfortunately it doesn't. But no, really, like, so I don't know if Miyazaki can be 100% credited with this being a thing. I like to think he did invent it, but I don't know for sure. I do know that his examples are some of the earliest I've seen, and certainly he's one of the most influential. But you're right. Yes, that became a huge staple of Dragon Ball. And obviously, once you get to like the whole Super Saiyan concept, it's like quite literal. But like even before that, even before the story invented that whole concept, it was just a common thing you would see in the animation where like Goku or someone's hair would like just like kind of like start to rise up a bit. And it'd be like, whoa, like with their eyebrows. And so in that way, I do feel like that's directly borrowed from Miyazaki, especially since, you know, in Dragon Ball's case, like if it's being adapted from a manga doesn't move like that. So it has to come from other examples in animation. And I'm not sure what the staff crossover, if there's any staff crossover between the two in terms of the animation stuff. But either way, Miyazaki's films are so influential on the industry that I do think that Miyazaki-ism, because to me it's a Miyazaki-ism, has been influenced and adapted across other anime and things like that. But just getting back to the idea of it being a Miyazaki-ism, you obviously also therefore see it in Princess Mononoke with Ashitaka, and actually more times than you see it in this. I feel like the only time you see it in Nausicaa is the one time I'm talking about. But in Mononoke, it happens quite a few times with Ashitaka. Like his hair just starts to go up, or San's hair starts to go up like that, and they're like, ah! It just like becomes like this scream thing. And you notice it there, so you get that Miyazaki-ism. But the point of it, both in Mononoke with Ashitaka and in Nausicaa with Nausicaa, is the characters are capable of being angry. Like as much as I'm saying their whole thing is that they're the calm presence, that they're not perfect. Therefore, they're not always calm. Therefore, they do get angry sometimes. And I think one of the things that's better or an improvement from Nausicaa to Mononoke is in Nausicaa. I think, and this is one of the things I think Miyazaki himself feels about this film, and in fact, he said as much, not about this specifically. I think he feels that this film is too neat and too clean. Like, if you go watch Mononoke and some of his later work, it's always a lot messier in terms of like, it's even way harder to distinguish right and wrong and see everything's much more shades of gray. So I think he actually doesn't like the way he made it simple to where Nausicaa has this one moment of getting too angry, and then after that, she never gets like that again. I think he much prefers what he did in Mononoke, where Ashitaka has those moments kind of throughout, and again, so do other characters, and it's less like any one way. And in some cases, he's saying, no, sometimes the anger and violence is justified. Like, if someone's really going to destroy the fucking planet, maybe you do need to bite their arm off. Like, it's like, it's like, you know, so there's a lot more complexity there. But yeah, so that brings me down to another sort of sub comparison within that, which is, you know, Nausicaa is also a lot like San or Mononoke. You know, there's some connections there, just the way they're drawn and so forth. Their sort of fierceness, what that looks like. They're fighting for the cause. But really, San and another gender reversal, or a gender reversal to match the other gender reversal, San is kind of probably a little more comparable to Asabel. This is like the loosest comparison, but they're both warriors on one of the sides, the more defensive or sympathetic side, if you will. Though actually, in Nausicaa, the Pedgites ultimately end up being worse than the Tolmekians in some senses, which is another thing that I think Miyazaki feels like that's not supposed to feel like that. I was like, again, because the movie is not as nuanced as it should be. But they also save the hero, and like they have this like, oh, they wake up and it's like, oh, I saved you type of shit, which is a common thing in these fantasy stories. But yeah, I just think even with the comparisons, like I said, another thing is it reminds me, looking at Nausicaa reminds me that perhaps Miyazaki, intentionally or not, was evoking what they called the Tezuka star system. And that's a reference to Osamu Tezuka, who was an artist who's kind of credited as the godfather of both manga and anime. Like, basically he invented it, because he would just like draw cartoons like similar to like Felix the Cat and things like that, like old 20s and 30s cartoons. No, he didn't, but he drew things like that. His like the anime style is not that different from that. And so it's interesting. You can see like he's the kind of guy who brings it in, and then it kind of starts to branch from there. You know what I mean? Like it's like the common ancestor, right? So because he was during like, the war and stuff, you have the Americans occupying Japan. And so there was a lot of like, bringing films over. So they would watch the cartoons, and Tezuka's really the first guy to just draw Japan's own, And so that's where Japanese animation and comics really come from Tezuka. And Tezuka, one of the things he did is in his comics, he would kind of sometimes, and I think, again, he got this from Disney, because you would see this with some of Disney's early stuff where, even Mickey Mouse himself was like, Mickey would be one character in one thing, and then he'd be another character in another thing, right? Like he'd be the Sorcerer's Apprentice, or he'd be Steamboat Willie, So Tezuka kind of did a similar thing where he would have certain characters, if you will, almost be like actors, and in a different story, he would recast them as new characters, but he could keep their basic facial design. And I think that just not only kind of created a weird simulacrum to films and film stars, but it just made his life easier, because he didn't have to draw all new character designs every time he created a new story, which is a challenge. Character designing is very challenging. And you'll notice with artists who do technically draw new characters all the time, like an example, Akira Toriyama, like his characters on his Dragon Quest are just kind of looks like a bunch of other characters he's drawn before. So it's like, it kind of just rehashes and recycles itself. So this quote star system is a way of like formalizing that, so it's not a bug, but a feature. And I'm not sure how Miyazaki himself sees this, but like, I can't look at Nausicaa and not think that Nausicaa is basically the same visual design as her successor Fio in Porco Rosso, which is another redheaded girl with the same exact fucking face. Alison Lohman's not who voices Fio in Porco, but it's a similar voice even too, and I imagine in Japanese similar thing. So it's like I can't see those characters as not analogous. Like Fio's a little bit more simple and spunky than even Nausicaa is. But
she's pretty spunky.
Yeah. Well, it's their role, whereas because Fio's not the main character of Porco, whereas she's more like the supporting character. It'd be like imagine if Nausicaa was told from the perspective of Lord Yupa, and like Nausicaa was just like the girl. It's just like, hey, come on, stop being an old man. Then there's the Asbel, the prince played by Shia. That kid, that design is basically the same design as the lead boy in Castle in the Sky, which is literally the next movie Miyazaki did. And then there's Kurotoa, the assistant, the general to Kashana, who's like, he's like that guy, voiced by Chris Sarandon. He's like, it's weird because I feel like this character's meant to be like he's supposed to be a little uglier, but like his design is very similar to the sort of Clark Gable style movie star. It's just, I guess, a way more handsome version in Porco. And then, but there's an even uglier version who's basically the same character in Mononoke. Another comparison, I forget the name of the character, but he's Lady Eboshi's right-hand man. So it's like the same exact role. So again, you can see that overlap. Now, moving on to a more broader Western kind of perspective on the overlaps and comparables. We mentioned Star Wars, and we could talk a little bit more about that. But I did get a chance to kind of read a bit of the manga. And one of the things I noticed is that right away, it opens with like a very detailed map of this fantasy world. And that immediately made me think of, a lot of fantasy books.
Lord of the Rings.
Almost exactly. All fantasy books get that from Lord of the Rings and Tolkien. So there's quite a few little things that I noticed are very Tolkien or straight out of Lord of the Rings. I mean, one of them is the character Lord Yupa. That's basically Gandalf. And even his entrance into the story, the way he like arrives at the Valley of the Wind is exactly the way Gandalf arrives in the Fellowship of the Ring to the Shire, and he meets with Frodo, and Frodo's like,
you are right.
in.
How did I not see that?
Yeah, and the little kids are all excited to see him.
Amazing.
So yeah. So there you go, and it could even be a thing where Nausicaa's inspired a little bit by Tolkien's book, and then the movie of the Lord of the Rings is a little bit inspired by Nausicaa, because there's no way Peter Jackson hasn't seen this movie either. So that's what I'm saying. The influence is kind of cyclical. And just in general, the thing that Lothar has with Frodo and a lot of other things is just this hero's journey style storytelling. And that's where you also get into the sort of the obvious overlap as well with Star Wars. I think you'll notice that Star Wars comes up a bit in Miyazaki stuff, especially even with Mononoke, which has a historical fantasy setting as opposed to a sci-fi one. But people are always like, oh, it's kind of like Star Wars because it's like wars and it's like the hero and stuff. And Nausicaa is really the more Star Wars-y one, which is why I think JJ probably was thinking of it when he was conceiving of The Force Awakens. He's like, oh, we should have, instead of Luke Skywalker, we should have a female hero. What's the prototype for that? Well, that's definitely would be Nausicaa or other Ghibli characters like that.
At that time.
Yeah, for sure. The last thing I'll say, just related to the manga before I basically leave it behind is, like I said, I haven't read through it yet. It's quite long, much longer than the movie, which is the point. Like when this movie got put into production, the comic had only been going for 2 years and it would go on for like another 8 years. So,
wow.
So like really this movie's only based off of like the first couple chapters.
One little bits of the series.
Yeah. So he had to kind of invent an ending to give it an ending, which is why I think the ending is a little bit like abrupt and perhaps unearned. We'll talk a little more about that. But one of the other things you'll notice that was different to me right away was like when I was looking at the first like couple chapters, it's like not only does it have these Tolkien like maps, but it's so much more like detailed and dense about this world. Like, oh, you'll read about details of like what's the Ptolemean Empire, what's the difference between them and the Begites, like their cultures, like what do they do. So it's a lot more fantasy world building stuff, which if you like that stuff, and which I do, I'm sure you do as well. Like, there you go.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So now I just want to kind of talk a little bit more about just who the hell is Hayao Miyazaki and how we got this film. So I'll save the basic bio information for, people to just look up themselves. It's really, whatever. It's just basic shit on Wikipedia. You can find out. But, guy's like pretty old now. His career stretches back to the 1960s. I mean, that's how old this guy is. But yeah,
So
early
impressive.
on in that career. So he's been basically in the industry since the industry existed almost. In Japan, that is, like in this post-Tezuka era. But he met this Isao Takahata, who's a very important figure you're going to be hearing more about. I kind of mentioned him. But he's the guy who would go on to direct the movie Grave of the Fireflies, which is one of probably the most sad and disturbing films of all time. Maybe we'll cover it, but Dana, like this movie is going to break you. Like you're going to be like, I can't deal with the world anymore. Because what it's about is these two kids who become orphans after we drop A-bombs on Japan.
Oh God, stop.
It's so bad. It is like one of the most, and like the little girl is like some cute little girl who's like dying. It's like fucked up. It is one of the most fucked up movies you've ever seen in your life.
Well, it's fucked up because it's true, Marcus.
Yeah, I know, and some people have accused the film, I mean, probably Americans who are doing counter propaganda, have accused the film of being propaganda to generate Japanese sympathy.
I mean, if you've been through trauma, how do you deal with trauma other than make art about it, right?
Exactly. Well,
that's what they're doing what they're supposed to do.
Grave of the Fireflies is obviously literally about the Hiroshima bomb, but the reality is almost like, and we talked about this when we talked about Tokyo Drifter and Gate of Flesh, but like it's hard to avoid the topic in almost any piece of Japanese media post A-bomb drop that it's influenced by it. Like you're going to find things in almost everything. It's really, I mean, maybe now very modern things have less to do with that and more to do with things that happen in Japanese society afterwards. But like, again, you could always trace it back another generation, right? So, sure. Miyazaki's films and some of the things that is in Nausicaa that we're going to talk about are obviously also influenced by A-bombs or the idea of weapons of mass destruction and what that is. So, yeah, but Takahata made Grave of the Fireflies. His last film, which is a beautiful film that hopefully one day we'll talk about, is The Tale of the Princess Kaguya. And that's based off Japanese folklore, the tale of the woodcutter. And this is really interesting because Takahata's style is not too dissimilar to Miyazaki's. Like there's some clear differences, but like, they kind of look similar, especially since a lot of the same Ghibli staff would work on both films, right?
Sure.
But
makes sense.
Kaguya is done in this literal watercolor woodblock style. So it's very different looking and it's very minimal. Like you would really like it. It's beautiful. It's beautiful looking movie. And it was his last film. But then, so they became friends and colleagues, and one of the early things they did together was they would be directors or co-directors on episodes of an anime show in the 70s called Lupin the Third. Now, I don't know if you've ever heard of Lupin the Third.
No.
But it's really interesting. Lupin the Third is like an important legacy, and obviously it's very important in this story because it's not only how Takahata and Miyazaki came to work together, it's also becomes the basis for Miyazaki's first film. But Lupin the Third is adapted from a comic of the same name by an artist who writes under the pseudonym Monkey Punch, which is funny. Monkey Punch, valid. Literally. Yes. But it's the premise is that Lupin the Third is the grandson of Arsène Lupin, who is I don't know if you've heard of him. I'm assuming not, because you might have thought that's what I was talking about. But that's a famous literary character from the French novelist Maurice Leblanc. And it's like kind of like a contemporary of Sherlock Holmes. In fact, there was a lot of unauthorized, you want to talk like MCU stuff, there was a lot of unauthorized and semi-authorized crossovers where it'd be like Sherlock versus Lupin. Like, you know what I mean? Or like, oh, the
so
shared universe.
I'm so enthralled, and I've read almost or listened and heard about most of Sherlock Holmes, but I have somehow missed Lupin all these years.
Mm-hmm. Well, because I think the Conan Doyle estate and stuff was like kind of like, I don't know, because he was less down for the crossovers than Maurice Leblanc, the creator of Lupin, was. I guess I should explain. Lupin is a thief. He's like a master thief. So it's like a master thief, master detective. And
cool.
Lupin's very, that's why I'm surprised you haven't heard of it, or maybe you've heard of this. But Lupin's kind of very prominent right now because Netflix has a very popular show called Lupin, where Omar Sy plays a modern version of the character. Or like basically he plays a guy who is, quote, inspired by the character, but the show itself is called Lupin in reference to it. So it's like, cool. Yeah, it's very popular right now. I think it's in second season now. But yeah, and I haven't watched it, but I heard it's really, really good. It's like got that thing where it's like, it's very Ocean's 11-y. It's like you're like heisting stuff. And so likewise, the anime Lupin the Third is kind of got that thing. And as a result of that, when Miyazaki finally was able to garner enough respect, if you will, enough seniority to be like, I want to become a director of a feature. It was like the natural thing was like, oh, well, we'll sign you the new Lupin, because they were making Lupin movies. So the first movie Miyazaki made was the Lupin the Third movie, The Castle of Cagliostro, in 1979. And like this film is considered to be an absolute epic classic. So right out the gate, he's like crushing it. However, the film did not do well financially. So it was not a success for him that way. But its influence is so heavy that this isn't what I mean when I say that like a lot of just people on the internet are like convinced that certain directors are stealing stuff from this film, whether it's been confirmed or not. An example, a lot of people think that Spielberg and George Lucas had seen this movie, and it was like very much on their minds when they were making Raiders of the Lost Ark. I don't know. Yeah, like I feel like that connection is a little vague, but like it's what it is like, and you see this even with Soderbergh's really into the Raiders of the Lost Ark, and he made the Ocean's films, and like you might look at Thieves and Indiana Jones as separate. But the thing you'll see in Castle of Cagliostro is like in Lupin stuff in general is that it's like very like high adventure. It's like, yeah, I'm going to swing from a vine. I'm going to like get in this crazy car chase through mountains. I'm going to like storm a castle in a clock tower. I'm going to hang from the thing. It's like, and that's what the Miyazaki really brought to the film that was so influential, is like that wire hanging kind of action. Like, and having a main character who's kind of oh shit, like kind of very Harrison Fordy in some ways. Like, just like,
well, Nausicaa is definitely that way with her hang glider. I mean,
yeah.
Wow.
For sure. Well, that's the thing. Yeah. He Lupin was a pre-existing character. So of course he's like this suave man guy who's like getting with girls all the time. But Miyazaki's speed, as you see in Nausicaa, is more like, I want these like, plucky female heroes, not so much that guy.
And that's the right choice.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's made it worked out. But yeah, so Lupin the Third, The Castle of Cagliostro, really influential thing. I mean, another thing people have pointed out is the Disney film from the 80s, The Great Mouse Detective. The climax of that film is like in this clock tower. So people are like, oh, see, that's just a set piece ripped right from Castle of Cagliostro. And given Disney and Ghibli's later connection, that one seems pretty obvious to me. Like, oh yeah, they were watching that. They were watching that.
Fairly likely.
Yeah, very likely. Now, how did Nausicaa actually happen? Because like I said, the Cagliostro film was not that big or underperformed to some extent. I don't know the exact numbers, but that's what more or less people say. Well, the film, one of the people that noticed the film and really was an immense champion for it, like a critic who, I mean, he's not really a critic, but a guy who ran a magazine, an editor of a magazine called Animage in Japan, was this guy Toshio Suzuki. And Toshio Suzuki becomes one of the most important people in the industry with Miyazaki. But they first met because he was just like, I want to write about you because I think you are the future of the industry. Like Castle Cagliostro rocks. I don't give a shit what anyone else says. Like, we want to cover you extensively in our magazine. We want to get the big exclusive story with you and like learn all about your influences and stuff and like that.
So this is the Star Maker.
This is the Star Maker. So
this is the Wendy Starlin of the anime world. She's the girl who discovered Lady Gaga.
Really? Okay, I like that.
Yes.
Yeah. You might be right about that. I did not know that, and that's interesting. So they met just to do magazine stuff, but when Suzuki kind of saw just like how much Miyazaki had in his like notebooks, and they just got to talking, got to kind of be friendly with each other, he was just kind of like, dude, like we need to like make a movie together, because I don't know if other people are banging down your door like to get you to direct more movies, but I want you to, and like maybe I could do that. Like, I'm technically just a magazine editor, but like, I don't know, like I obviously I do this because I love anime. Like, I want to make a movie with you. So they're like, okay, let's go around, but we have to get money for the movie, of course. So they were going around pitching it to studios and to financiers, and they just keep getting rejected. And one of the big reasons they kept getting rejected is because they were pitching original stories, and pretty much everyone was like, we don't want original stories. We want adaptations of existing comics. Like that's what we want. We don't want they want IP. Like, they don't want originals. So it's very funny how that was like already happening then. Like, that's a very modern industry problem. But thankfully the solution became, okay, so Suzuki was like, well, Animage, the magazine, is part of this larger is under the brand of this larger publisher, Tacoma Shoten, and why don't we go to Tacoma Shoten and see if they are willing to do the movie. So they go to them, and Tacoma Shoten, same thing. They're kind of like, we don't want anything that's not based on an existing property, and we already have existing properties, so you should do one of those. And they're like, we don't want to do one of those. But they, through the pitch, they were like looking at the stuff Miyazaki was showing them, his like drawings and sketches and stuff. And they were like, well, I don't know, dude, we'll hire you to do a comic. Like, you can do a manga that we'll publish. And so, being kind of like, okay, Miyazaki was just like, all right, I need the work. I don't know if Suzuki maybe thought, okay, maybe that's how we parlay this into a movie. But it's seeming like Miyazaki either also thought that, but was going to be sort of very strategic about how he dealt with it, or legitimately and earnestly he was like, I'm done with animation. I should just draw pictures and get them published as a comic, right? So yeah, the thing that they hired him to do was Nausicaa. That's what he was like drawing into. So he starts working on it in '79. This all happened right after Cagliostro came out. But the actual first issue wasn't published until 1982. So he took a long time working on this. And I think it was because he was doing all this complicated world building and trying to make it like a real dense thing. And it was like really popular, like almost right away. People were like, who's this guy? This is like the coolest comic in this publication. Like, we want to see more of this. So now all of a sudden Tacoma Shoten's like, can you do an anime for us? And Miyazaki's like, I don't want to do it. It's too much work.
What?
Yeah. That's what I'm saying. Maybe he did this on purpose as like a negging strategy, but knowing him, he seems pretty earnest. I feel like he might have been like, fuck you, I don't want to. Now you want my movie? You can't have it. It could have been any number of things like that. But essentially, they kept coming back to him, And maybe this was it, because maybe at first they were like, maybe he was like, I'll do it if I can direct it. And they were like, do you need to direct it? We'd rather you just focus on drawing the manga. And he's like, no, I'm not doing it then. But when they finally struck a deal, it was the deal based on that Miyazaki would be the director and screenwriter and all that. So finally the Nausicaa movie's greenlit, and Toshio Suzuki's still involved, though kind of more background player. Instead, Miyazaki brings on Isao Takahata, his friend, his co-directing friend, to help him put together the team of animators to make this film, since he's an anime professional and like a great artist and director in his own right. So,
but he also probably works with a lot of people and already knows people that would be great for those positions. So.
Exactly. Like that's the thing. At this point, Takahata is much more immersed in the industry than Miyazaki is. So that's kind of why. And so he becomes the producer of the film, and they're going around because they have money, but they don't have a pre-existing studio, because this is before what became Studio Ghibli existed. So they're like kind of shopping it around to different animators and trying to make hires and like figure out what they're doing. They end up at this studio called Topcraft, which is like a very smaller studio. But the good part is they were able to bring on some additional talent. Now, one person I want to highlight that they bring on, because he's a big deal to me and someone we're probably going to talk about in the future, either on the main show or in a bonus show on the Patreon, is this guy Hideaki Anno. And Hideaki Anno he would come on to become one of the biggest auteur directors after Miyazaki, really, in Japan when it comes to this stuff. And this is interesting because I remember I was telling you how Miyazaki, he's kind of disapproving of his own son. He's not a person who gives a lot of compliments to other people. But
I think often culturally, parents don't seem to be particularly warm in their stories and in their, in any kind of movies that I've watched. It seems like that's kind of the thing. Like you don't say I love you and give lots of hugs and kisses in that culture.
It's like no, you're right that is definitely and I mean this in a non-pejorative way. That's definitely is the stereotype. And Miyazaki, my whole point is Miyazaki is absolutely that stereotype. But I do think, even just thinking about some father characters in Miyazaki's own films, it's like there is a sense that it could be another way. It's just that he's not that way. But my point about that is he's a very demanding, But
isn't that why that's a fantasy? Or isn't that why these are fantasy movies?
Yes, true. But I was just going to say, it's funny because we talked about Phantom Thread, and that was actually the first episode we released. So go listen to that. That's episode 1 on the feed. Great episode. But when I watched the Miyazaki documentaries, Miyazaki, just even the way he wears this apron, he reminds me so much of Reynolds Woodcock. Like Studio Ghibli is the House of Woodcock of animation.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, he's super precise. He walks around. He's constantly agitated because he thinks what he did is not good enough. He's my God. There's all these women working under him. He's just he's walking around just it's oh, she's got a great personality. I love her. But it's he's also but it's no good. It's and he's always, I guess Reynolds doesn't really smoke, but Miyazaki's always chain smoking cigarettes, which is another reason why it's shocking that he's so old and still rocking. But hey, man, that's Japan for you.
Some of the world's oldest people have a small amount of tobacco every day.
No, in Japan it's very prevalent. A lot of old smokers in Japan,
but they also eat their weight in vegetables every year.
Exactly.
Three times over.
It's definitely mostly a dietary thing, and I think maybe also a cultural thing, because I think the psychological effect of having that much reverence paid to you just makes your life much better.
Well, also literally it's easier to get to the doctor's office and such, and people respect you.
Yeah, totally. No, very good point on that. But so Miyazaki's very Reynolds Woodcock, but with that comparison, it's always interesting to me to see that when you see, and there's a great dual interview they did some years ago, but when you see Miyazaki talk about Hideaki Anno, who, when he came on to work on Nausicaa, was a very young guy who was basically making his own little independent animations in college with his friends. Like, that's how that guy got started. It's
awesome.
like a cool story. I love that. Like, you just like drawing stuff. It's like, we made this like this cool fan movie and like stuff. But he had a lot of incredible talent. And
I mean, that's what you want to see.
Yeah, he was also known to be like, I think this is what Miyazaki probably liked about it. In fact, I was watching a documentary a week or two ago about Anno, and this was Miyazaki's comment. He was talking about how he would come into the studio and when they were working on Nausicaa, and Anno would be like sleeping on the floor. like he did not leave. Like, he would just like work his ass off, which again, Japan has an intense culture with like workaholism. But
I think sleeping in public culture is so strange to me, just because I wouldn't trust someone to not rob me if I'm sleeping on the street.
Oh, totally. But Miyazaki's whole joke about Anno, this is true, and you even see it in the documentary, like he still does this day. He like loves just like walking around the office barefoot, like being like, he's kind of like, he seems very laid back and like almost like Zen, but he's like secretly like the most neurotic, hardworking person. And it's very funny. Like, there's a lot of creative energy that's interesting about Anno. But my point is, Miyazaki loves this guy. And it makes you think like, oh, this is the quote son you might have chose. Yeah. It's and he's like, oh yes, I'm very proud of him. His work is great. Like, I have a lot of nostalgia for when he was a young man at the studio. Like, it's like, yeah. But look, hey man, like again, I eternally feel bad for Goro Miyazaki. I hope you are well, sir. I love Hideaki Anno and I love his work. So what Hideaki Anno is famous for, because I haven't said yet, is he's very famous for directing and creating the anime series from the mid-90s called Neon Genesis Evangelion. And Evangelion is probably like one of my like favorite things to this day. Like, and I part of the reason it's been on my mind a lot lately, and even with this documentary that I was referring to about Anno has to do with, is that I won't get into trying to explain this because it's super complicated, but the series is in a sense still going. Like, the final film just came out in Japan a couple months ago, and now it's going to be coming out internationally on Amazon Prime in about a month. So we're real close to it now. So it's a big deal. And the documentary is about him making that film and how like personal it is for him, and like how it took like 6 years to make. And he's like, you know, Anno's also kind of known for being very like, Miyazaki seems pretty depressive, but I've never heard any stories about Miyazaki like dealing with it in this suicidal way. Whereas Anno is kind of known to be like, yeah, he talks about it in the documentary very matter of fact. He's like, yeah, I went up to the top of the building and I was going to jump, but then I just thought it would hurt too bad. So I didn't. I have to chuckle just because it's like a very intense thing. And that's the thing. Evangelion's known for being this kind of like mind fucky, like this will give you depression type of thing by the end of it. Which I think, to the point about the final film that Anno's working on, which, you know, Japanese audiences have already seen, is I kind of feel like he's not finished with it and wants to be finished with it, because it's like, I want it to end in a place that is reflective of where I am today, which is, I think I'm a married man who's grown up a lot, and I feel much more content with my life, and I understand it myself a lot better. So there's like growth there, and I really respect that. And I think that's, I mean, I'm giving it so much credit, not just because I'm obsessed with it, but like, because to me, that's at the core mission of what I think this podcast is about, and everything, is that film and cinema can be a way for us to sort ourselves out and learn about the world.
Art is therapy.
Yeah.
Any kind. Filmmaking, film watching even can be therapy, and can help you. At least I think good art puts a mirror to you.
Yeah.
And if you find a film that resonates, oftentimes it feels like a mirror.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So that's kind of at the core of what I feel like is the mission. And likewise, you know, with Nausicaa and Miyazaki's films, it's like he is really exploring these. He's exploring the topics he explores about the war and the environment. I think some people might interpret it as him being preachy. It's really more, I think he himself like can't sleep at night because of these things. You know, he is trying to sort out his feelings and about them. He's trying to sort out his, like, if you watch these documentaries I'm talking about, you will see this. He is trying to sort out his very genuine sense of despair about the world. Like, he is like the guy in, like the eco-terrorist guy in the movie First Reformed. He's like, why would we bring, I mean, maybe this affects his relationship with his son. It's like, why would we bring children into this world that's dying? Like, why would we, like, he's really, this stuff keeps him up at night. Like, he's not just like doing it to like, again, just get the messaging out there. It thinks like he's making some sort of change. I think he's just like more like, this is what fuels my mind, what, like it or not. This is what gives me anxiety. I have to make my films about it. One thing I'll just note before we leave Anno and that behind, but you know, anyone who's seen Evangelion will understand Anno's style with regards to this. He likes drawing giant, grotesque things and explosions, and he's the animator responsible for the climax of Nausicaa. So all the stuff with the giant and the explosions and the ohm,
nice.
Like, so like, yeah. So that, I mean, that you look at that, you're like, damn, no wonder he impressed everybody, because that shit was crazy. Awesome. So yeah. So he's very good at that kind of big scale stuff, for sure. But okay, yeah. But you know, Nausicaa, he puts it together. It comes out. It's a success, and because of that success, Suzuki and Takahata and Miyazaki are able to go to Tacoma Shoten and say, give us more money and we're going to form our own studio. That studio is Studio Ghibli. Ghibli is the Italian word for wind. You'll notice that in Nausicaa, not always the Nausicaa in the Valley of the Wind, but they talk about it, you know, I prefer the ways of water and wind to the ways of fire. That's one of the lines that the old men say to sorry, what's her name? Kushana, Uma Thurman.
When she's trying to burn down the whole place, and he said, we have only learned to use fire in small amounts.
Yes, because you still need fire, but only in small amounts.
But only in small amounts.
And what they say, the reason why is because fire is just fast. It's too fast. Fire will burn down a forest that will take hundreds of years to grow in a day. You know, water and wind are slower, but that's why we have to cherish them. It's a very Japanese perspective in that sense as well, is like that emphasis on time and respect for that. So yeah, so they formed Ghibli, and like I mentioned, you know, when we talked about Miyazaki in passing before, he's obsessed with planes and aeronautics and the Italian plane designer. So the idea that he would want his studio to be called the Italian word for wind makes a lot of sense. You have Nausicaa, the gliders, Porco is about a pilot, an Italian pilot. Wind Rise is about a literal Japanese plane designer. You know, planes are everywhere. Castle in the Skies, tons of aircraft. Everything's about air, wind, and planes. And water's big too. The film he directed, Ponyo, is basically his take on The Little Mermaid, where it's a little goldfish who turns into a little girl. If you've not seen this movie, Dana, by the way, I don't even know if I want to.
I feel like, wait, is Ponyo a short or is it a feature?
No, it's a feature. I think there might have been a short made from.
Because I feel like I've seen a short of that, but not a feature.
Yeah, well, I'll just say this because I don't know if we'll cover Ponyo because it's definitely not my favorite Miyazaki film, but you should definitely check it out because like. If anyone who likes quote cute things, and I don't really, which is why I get like even woozy saying the words sometimes. But this movie is probably like the cutest movie ever made.
You're kidding.
Oh yeah, I think if you think Totoro's cute, you wait till you see Ponyo.
Totoro is so cute.
But Ponyo is literally like a little girl, like it's the Little Mermaid. If the Little Mermaid was a toddler, and therefore her human love interest was another toddler. Like a boy toddler. And so it's just like she's like running around. She's like running around like what? It's like and and the English voice cast is great. Tina Fey plays the mother of the boy. And so she's like, who's this little girl you're bringing home? Like, it's like, oh, this is Ponyo. She's a fish. I'm like, what? Why is she walking? It's a sweet movie. But that was Miyazaki. That was a Miyazaki film he did in 2008. Anywho, so Nausicaa is become a cultural touchstone. It's not technically not a Ghibli film, but it's the film that caused the founding of Ghibli film, and retroactively is, a Ghibli film, I guess. But yeah, like now it's just kind of like, and this kind of will be the sort of final area we're going to get into, but we're really going to try to dig deep into it as we can, is the actual themes and so forth and story of the film. One other thing I'll say on that, by the way, is just that one other thing that I wanted to note that has a lot of similarities to this, and I'm almost to the point where I'm like, more people have to answer for how much they rip off Nausicaa, okay? Like, it's actually kind of crazy. But there's a video game from a few years ago, a big major PlayStation Sony game called Horizon Zero Dawn. Horizon Zero Dawn stars a redheaded girl who is great with her like fighting with this like staff, and has the ability to control the animals. And the animals in this are these actually robot dinosaurs, because like Nausicaa, it's set in a post-apocalyptic far future where society has retrograded down to like a more tribal sort of existence. But there's these quote animals that are called the machines that roam around, and they're basically these mech dinosaurs. But she's able to control them, whereas most people just hunt and kill them. And their story involves her finding out that the dinosaurs that people are afraid of, that she has the ability to control, are actually saving the planet. They're detoxifying it in the same exact way the Ohm and the Toxic Jungle are. It's quite literal. And even the way the character is played, like the way her emotions are, she also is like that calming presence who stands in between the warring tribes and stuff. It's 100% a Nausicaa ripoff. And I played this whole game many times, like got the platinum trophy, spent like 200 hours on it, and I never once thought about it, the fact that it was a Nausicaa ripoff, until today. Because I'm doing all this stuff and writing about Nausicaa ripoffs, and then I'm like, wait a minute, isn't Horizon a Nausicaa ripoff too? And then I was like, holy shit, it's the biggest one.
Another one.
It's the biggest Nausicaa ripoff of all Nausicaa ripoffs. Like, it's crazy. It even, again, like has opening sequences involving the girl exploring some cavern where she finds ancient technology. It's like, oh my God. Yeah. So there's a ton of that. But again, I think the reason for that is the trappings and setting makes sense. The iconography makes sense with redheaded girls, but really it's the story and themes that are so eternal. Because the reason Horizon is doing it is because it's saying, like, look at this planet dying. Like, if we let it die, if humanity survives, the best we can hope for is that somebody one day will come along and try to fix it. And it might take thousands of years for that to happen. Years. Yeah. Because the damage we're doing to the planet is not so easily reversed. I mean, this is the point about the fire versus the water and wind. Mm-hmm. It's going to take thousands of years for that forest to regrow, but it only takes a day for the fire to burn it down. And that's why we have to really consider that. We can't treat fire lightly, but we always have. And this is where it gets into what I'm talking about is, when you look at Porco Rosso, which is a film about the rise of fascism, and, there's a lot to be said about Miyazaki with regards to how he views politics and structure. But I think he is one of the most intensely correct, politically minded filmmakers. It's not just the feminism or the environmentalism. I mean, those things are important, but to me, what really sells it is the way he seems to really grapple and understand how both of those things are products of the way power works and the way our systems are. Like the Tolmekian Empire, you notice how Kashuna talks about it. She talks about it like she is a corporate executive. She says, we are building an enterprise. Like, that's how she talks about it. Like, this empire is synonymous with corporations.
Right.
It's just the idea of like, oh yes, we'll make so much money by extracting the value of this planet away from it. And you can either join us and by, when I say join us, I don't mean join us as weakles. I mean, become our willing servants. I mean, become our slaves, become our workers. You can either do that, or we will cut your throats. Either way is fine with us. Because when we cut your throats, we're going to take all your resources and plunder all your land. So it's all good.
So win-win for us.
Win-win for us, right? So there's that kind of attitude, and it's also just, and I think you get more of this with the Pedgites, who you think are quote good at first, but you find out that they're committing war crimes, perhaps far more atrocious than even what we know the Tolmekians are doing. And that's the thing. It's like it's a very serious look at, again, there are no good sides in a war. There are only death, destruction, and violence. And the emphasis on war crimes and weapons of mass destruction in this film is very important. Like, the way Nausicaa reacts to it. I think this is why, again, it's not just that Miyazaki is a, quote, feminist. I think he understands that traditionally and psychologically and therefore sociologically and anthropologically, women are our best hope to be voices for reason. Because that's what they were, and that's what they need to be again. Nausicaa really, and this is what I mean about Alison Lohman's performance. I actually get emotional thinking about this. Is actually really, really, really powerful. Is like when she's like screaming at them, like, "Don't do that!" Like you're hurting the creature. You're hurting these things. You're doing these horrible, horrible things. And you think it's like, because the first response she gets back from Mark Hamill, the is just like, well, we have to. It's do or die. The Tolmekians will kill us all if we don't. And, he's not necessarily wrong about that. That's true. But like this idea that that's the only concern you have, and that there's no bottom you won't sink to, and that there's no consideration for the larger whole, there is
the tunnel vision of power.
There is a real gender dynamic to it too.
There is, but I think the culturally the focus on the mission statement and the mission statement only that I think a lot of companies have makes you blind to everything else.
Oh yeah,
that's maybe what he's touching on too.
Well, definitely. And it's like but I just mean like the emotion she gives, because I think we have this thing, and it's something I really want to bulk against is, there's the very base misogynistic point of view. It's like, oh, women are too emotional to be in politics. That's so absurd that it should just be swatted away. But there is a small degree of truth in it that's even more menacing when you view it correctly, which is, well, why is that a bad thing? Like, the problem is that people aren't emotional enough, I would say, or they're emotional in a certain degree that we've rewritten to be not emotional. We look at retaliation and reactionism as logical or coherent, but that's just bias. That's just bias of the status quo. That's bias of patriarchy.
It's like what we were talking about earlier. Yeah. It's like, are you mad about what you're mad about, or are you mad about your grudge?
Right. It's exactly what I'm talking about. This cycle of retaliation is considered logical. That's bullshit. The emotion of being able to scream when you see something else in pain, the emotion to be able to say that is hurtful to the soul, the emotion that says we actually need to hold this together and we need to look each other in the eye and we need to sit through our conflicts. We can't avoid conflict. We have to make room for conflict. We have to allow conflict to happen. I actually had a situation that I won't get into the details of, just personally, that I experienced a few days ago, where I really saw this play out in real time. And it could be a scary thing for some people, but to me, it was a beautiful thing, because I saw two people come into conflict, but because they were actually given the space and the safe space, I should say, to hash that conflict out, actual progress was made. Because where progress doesn't get made is when you just say, okay, great, now we're enemies, and now let the cycle begin. Or really, in most cases, let the cycle continue, because who the fuck knows where this started? We're just inheritors of it. And we don't have any ability to stop it because we can't see past it. Well, not seeing past it, as again, this film points out, is a death sentence. It's a real fucking death sentence, a permanent one. We're not going to survive if we can't get our shit together.
Absolutely.
And I mean, that's the thing. I don't think Miyazaki makes his films like this because he's just trying to be preachy about that. And I mean, imagine if people had listened to it in 84 and said, oh, right, let's stop all this now. We're a long way from there. The damage that's been done since then is insane to think about. So yeah, I also can't blame him for being as nihilistic as he seems to have gotten in his old age. But yeah, man, really, like we don't have a lot of choice here. And
I mean, the only one listening to him really seems to be Greta Thunberg.
You know,
she must have watched a Miyazaki film when she was young.
I bet she has. I bet she has. You know, that's actually, I'm not even trying to make a joke about it, but I kind of feel like in Sweden, they fucking play those films for children on loops because they're like, yes, care about the environment. Like. I mean,
who's to say?
I mean, it works.
It seems like she would have.
It's the Husavik TV stations in Iceland. That's all they play. They just play. But anyway, no, really. No, there are. I mean, they don't get enough visibility. That Greta is just someone who actually has managed to be visible, and good on her. But there are tons of very at hard work activists who fight these things and who are trying to gain that foothold and are trying. And I have had success, stopping certain actions from being taken. And if any people like that are listening right now, please do reach out. I'm going to have a proper email, by the way, for the show to take everyone's questions and comments and if, like I said, corrections. Yes, we will issue corrections to things we get wrong. We promise. And we definitely have gotten things wrong. I try to edit them out, but sometimes I leave them in because I'm like, I don't want to be evasive about things I got wrong sometimes. But yeah, then a correction will come later if you write in. But I also really want everyone in our audience to feel like they can reach out if they feel a passion about something we talk about, or they want to share a perspective. And like I said, the goal is to start intaking guests. So anyone who's an activist who wants to come on and talk about either, any film about environmentalism or about struggle, another Miyazaki film, when we talk about Mononoke, when we talk about, what's another good one in the environment? Well, Ponyo is another environmental story, of course. Stop poisoning the ocean. Of course. Spirit Away. All these things. I mean, really, they all do. If anyone wants to come on and talk about that, please, let me know. And if we can make it happen and, we feel it'll be a good use of everyone's time, then we will absolutely do it. And even if we are like, oh, maybe that's not the best fit for an episode or something, I would still appreciate the correspondence. I mean, one of my goals here is to really be of service to everyone. That's an important thing to me. So yeah, let's definitely reach out. But in terms of what's going on with Nausicaa and this call to recognize what we're doing here, Japan, like we alluded to before, Japan is the only country to have had nuclear weapons detonated on it. I mean, and this pervades through everything, right? So when we talk about the war crimes, they're hardly the only place that have suffered atrocious war crimes and genocide. So I don't want to get that confused.
Absolutely.
But the sheer colossal explosiveness, the fire, as they will, of a nuclear bomb. I mean, that is why it's so hard to get rid of, is because, quite literally, nuclear fallout lasts decades. And, you know, people are still, longer, hundreds of years. You're right. Yeah.
Thousands of years. It's 100,000 years at least before the soil is considered non-toxic enough for you to spend hours on.
Oh yeah. You know, yeah.
It's a lot.
Yeah. No, I'm glad you can clarify that, Dana.
You have to think about the half-life of the uranium.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, you know what I mean. Actually, you know, because I'm realizing that you. I
can look through my school books and find the half.
Yeah, but no, you do have a lot of background insight onto
exactly.
this. You know, that's a good side note for me. No, but you're learning, and that's what's important.
It's literally so long.
I was just gonna say, I do think we can cover more things related to nuclear kind of subject matter, I guess. Okay.
Did you watch Chernobyl?
I did not, actually. I did not. That's certainly part of
that. Hot damn. Chernobyl was a great show.
So I've heard. Yeah, I definitely want to check it out at some point.
And it often reminds me of, which is sad, but it often reminds me of current political situations now being in a pandemic, of how people just want to kind of hide facts and evidence for political reasons. It's crazy how long that's been going on.
It's always been going on, and it's really bad. Yeah, no, and just a side note, like there's so many lines in Nausicaa where they're like, "Don't put on your mask. You have to have your mask on," which is coincidental because they're not talking about, you know, viral disease, but you know,
spores.
It's interesting. Poison spores. Yeah. But okay. Yeah, so you know the impact of the nuclear weapons. I mean, that's to me what the fire giants are really obviously meant to signify, and the cruelty of the abuse of the Ohms is definitely just a stand-in for other types of war crimes and abusing animals and creatures and abusing nature, of course. So these are really atrocious things that people do, and they do it out of this cycle of brutality where there is no end. Like there's always something before. Someone wronged someone before. It just
I think at some point that becomes tradition.
It becomes tradition.
Traditionally, we're enemies.
It like I said, I alluded to earlier about how it does this in our modern politics, but it's always done this, which is people unite over it. That's why it's so infectious. It actually is
because the enemy of my enemy is my friend.
Well, but it's like this.
Oh, we hate the same guy.
It's sort of this. It can be solidaritous for the in group. If you're all saying we are united because we hate this other thing, or because we are in a fight against this other thing, or because we are victims of this other thing, but you know, and because we're victims, we have to now aggress. That is a uniting force, and it's a very destructive one, and we see it in our modern world. And I don't think I'm going to get too much into some of the modern examples. I think people who might be, you know, smart can kind of read in what they want to about that, and that's fine. But there's a real damage to that mentality. It's a mentality that never ends. You know, another video game that I would love to cover in a bonus episode or in some other fashion, because I actually already wrote all my notes for it.
Did?
Yeah, because when this game came out, I just had a lot to say, so I kind of put everything, and you know, I made some Reddit posts and things. But is The Last of Us Part 2? Well, the whole thing with The Last of Us, and actually,
I know a little bit about The Last of Us.
Yeah, speaking of Chernobyl, Craig Mazin, who's the showrunner and creator of Chernobyl, is now the showrunner of the HBO adaptation of The Last of Us that's coming out.
Oh, you're kidding?
No, I'm not kidding. So there's already crossover there. Yeah.
That's pretty. Wait, but I didn't realize that HBO was making a show, because I know enough about the story to be really excited that there's a show coming out. But I don't. I've not actually played it myself.
Yeah. Well, I've played the first one. The first one is an amazing story, and it touches on definitely the cycles of violence and just the brutality of survival and mankind and post-apocalypse. But to me, it's one of those examples, and you could tell they had this ambition from the start. They literally called the game The Last of Us Part 2, which immediately evokes The Godfather Part 2. And as I've mentioned when we've talked before, Dana, The Godfather Part 2 even if you don't think it's literally the best sequel of all time, it certainly writes the template for what the best sequel of all time ought to be.
I would agree with you.
Well, I don't even know if I think it literally is, or it's certainly.
No, but I would agree that it's a perfect example of what it should be.
Right, totally. So, and what that is, as I think we when we talked, we had our discussion about Blade Runner, which we haven't released yet, but that'll be coming probably, in the next week or two. When I talked about Blade Runner 2049, I talked about it, how I think it actually is one of these sequels. Whether you think that makes it superior to the original or not is a separate conversation, but not really. It's what it really comes down to is the perfect sequel is a sequel that builds on the first thing and subverts it in other ways. But ultimately what it does is it creates a whole. It creates a whole where the sum is greater than the sum, or the total is greater than the sum of its parts. And each part builds on the last part, and it retroactively makes the first part better because of the depth that it adds to it. And you just
the
feel
details
this whole
that you now
thing.
know.
Right. So, and also just the thematic completion, because The Last of Us 1 really stands on its own as a story. And there's some question whether there should even be a 2. But then you get The Last of Us 2, and it to my mind, and I'll explain why much more detail if we do cover it in one of these episodes, which I think we will do, is it really completes it because it takes some of the ideas in Last of Us 1 and makes them the main themes, and then uses that to build on what the main themes of the first one were. And so it just makes, that's one of the ways it makes the first one better, is because you're like, now you look back at the first one in light of those thematic completions and those thematic additions. And what you realize that the whole story is about, that the part 2 is just expertly tells in the most brutal of ways, is it is a dissection, a critique, a meditation, a sort of look into the darkest abyss of the cycles of violence and hate. And it gets at exactly what I was just talking about, where the most insidious thing about that sort of cycle of hate is the fact that it creates a sort of group that feels like a family. It feels like a society. Like whole societies, whole tribes are built on the mission of hate. It's why it's so hard to let it go, because without that, do you even have an identity? Who are you if you don't have this grudge?
Who are you if you don't have this hate?
So it's
the hate defines
really toxic. It's the most toxic thing, like the toxic jungle. I mean, that's the other thing. It's like, I think that environmental damage, there's 2 levels to it. There's the actual environmental damage. There's the actual damage of weapons. Then there's the damage to the soul. There's the damage to the human psyche that comes from not only that, but the desires that lead to those things. We're not just poisoning the earth, we're poisoning us. We're so sick. I mean, that's what you see in the sickness of the people that, even in the Valley of the Wind, they can't escape. It's right. This sickness that just won't go away, because we are killing ourselves when we continue this cycle of retribution and violence and indifference and apathy.
Well, it's when
you let hate have the power.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Over you.
One thing that you don't see, at least, so this is another reason why I really want to read the Nausicaa manga, because I imagine they have the opportunity to get into a lot more of this.
100%. If you find it online, I'll go halvesies with you.
Yeah, so that there's a box set of the actual hard covers that are incredibly nice that I want to get. But there's also ways to just low key just read it online for free. But I'll just say I'm going to buy the box set because I want it, but I'm also going to probably just read it for free. And I don't think there's anything wrong with you doing that too. Sorry, I'm not trying to support piracy. I like I said, I'm going to buy it. But no, really, I imagine they get a lot more into this, because I know Miyazaki's very conscious of this. When you look at the story of Porco Rosso or the story of Howl's Moving Castle, it's all about the corruption and the curse to the body that comes from indulging in war and violence and cycles of hate, and the sort of just absolute just like senselessness of it. And the vanity of it. Like, that's the thing about Howl's Moving Castle. We'll definitely cover this, but the theme of it that people I think miss is they don't understand the connection between the vanity and the war. The whole point is that war is this very vain exercise. And so it gets into all this nationalism and symbolatry of like the great European period of bellicoseness before the Great War. And like everyone's very nationalistic, holding all these flags and emperors and stuff. And it's like the pomp and circumstance of the uniforms and the parades. It's like, that's a fucking insidious thing. It is creating this cycle of vanity and like romanticism around war. That's what it is. And that's the ultimate perversion of the sickness, is to think it's this something to celebrate. But just bringing it back on The Last of Us before leaving that behind is just to say that, I mean, what I really appreciate is that it really goes very deep on that sort of that war on yourself. It's like, it gets all the way to the depths of like, who is it that you really hate? Often it's you. You just hate yourself.
It's
like
always you. People who love themselves don't act violently towards others that do things that they don't like.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? If you truly love yourself, you're like, okay, this person doesn't. And this is how they're dealing with it. It has nothing to do with me. I didn't do anything here. This was going to happen or whatever. I think sometimes you let the damaged pride and you let the ego take over. And I think everyone's guilty of this, myself included. You let the ego take over, and then you focus on the anger that the ego feeds, and the ego feeds your anger, and the anger feeds your ego. And you're in this cycle of unhealthiness towards yourself and towards others. And I think sometimes people in power don't have anybody to rein them in, and they don't have to answer to even themselves. If you don't have to answer to yourself and you're in power and it makes you angry and you have this anger, who's going to stop you?
Really brilliantly said, Dana. I couldn't agree more. I mean, that really is too. And I mean, it's kind of a separate topic, but like the idea of the way, just being in quote power, as you said, or having power be concentrated on one person or a few people, and it's an isolating thing. That's the thing. It hurts their souls. It isolates and deteriorates their psyche. And that's what's so insidious about it too. We're all victims of this system that allows it. And now I still think part of the only way we can challenge that system is to challenge those people directly. But it's not to say we don't have empathy for them, because I do think that that those people, the damage is really being done to themselves as well. But it's just not to say that the damage they do themselves should seemingly, quote, outweigh the damage they might be doing to millions and millions of people. But like that, I think that that's the sort of contradiction that we have to hold there, is the sense of the scale is important, but at the end of the day, everything is experienced by the individual in their own individual way. And if we want to have proper scale, we have to hold the empathy. And that's, again, what you see with Nausicaa. She does not, whether she's talking to Kushana or the Pedgite leader, even when she's like screaming at him and so disgusted with him, like that's the visceral disgust that Nausicaa has to that guy and what he's saying. It's really potent. It's really powerful. It does get to me. It's like so visceral. Again, Alison Lohman, give her a lot of credit for the way she plays it in the English dub. It's like how fucking dare you do this? It's so criminal and so horrifying. But she doesn't express that disgust as like, now I hate you. Now I want to stab you. Now I want to. It's not that.
It's not you. It's the action. You did this.
Yeah, it was. But it's like, I mean, that's definitely one way of putting it. But I don't even know. Like, I think it's like, it's hard to put it. That's why it's such a struggle for us as human beings to really wrap our minds around.
Are you talking about specifically when she finds out that they took the baby?
Well, they took the baby, but they're also about to like send a bunch of ohm to like storm into the Valley of the Wind like it's nothing. But she just like, because she already knows, even before she sees literally that they're like torturing this baby, she already knows that's what it's going to be, something like that.
The valley.
She understands like there's no way they're going to be able to do what they're doing without doing something like that. It's all too obvious. It's like and the fact that they like, they let their whole city get savage just so they could, get revenge. Like, it's like this, it's just really disturbing thing. But she, in that moment, even as she's expressing such visceral disgust, she doesn't, you can also tell, and this, again, the performance I think really holds to this. You can tell she's not like, now I hate you. Now she's saying, and you see a similar thing with Ashitaka and Princess Mononoke. It's like this, she has empathy. She has sympathy. She sees that, like, she's almost as angry and disgusted, not just because of the actual damage they're going to do to all these innocent people, but the damage they are doing to themselves, the damage they're doing to their own tribe, to their own personal human experience. She's just as concerned about that. And I mean, I think if more people really held to understanding that and thinking about that, they would be much more impactful in the way they communicate and talk people down when they're doing things like this. I mean, which isn't to say that would work, because as you see in Nausicaa, she's not able to stop them at all, because the reality is you have to actually hold the system and structure of power that allows this type of thing to happen accountable first. And that's a much more complicated thing that not one person can solve, which brings it back down to this finale. Miyazaki had not finished his manga. He had to come up with an end for the film. He's basically more or less said he does not like the end that he put.
Oh, really?
Yes. And I can see why. It's way too just like magical thinking. It's like, oh, well, I guess she fulfills the prophecy, so she just calms the ohm by default, and magically everything's good.
And Grandma's in shock.
Yeah, that's not how Miyazaki writes, and that's not his thing at all. And it's an incredibly, given how seriously he's taking the message and themes of this story in this world, it's an incredibly disingenuous thing. I mean, yes, it's fitting with mythological storytelling and religious storytelling, but that's not...
Yeah, the heroine wins in the end. She saves everybody.
Well, then it's also like this spiritual transcendent thing, which I have no problem with, but it's not earned, it's not set up, and it's very, very, very...
It was not set up. It was surprising.
Well, it's set up in the sense that it sets up the myth, but it's still not earned. I mean, I really do like that sort of trauma flashback scene where it's like her as a little girl and she's trying to hide the baby Ohm from her parents. Because she's
just screaming, "Don't kill it! Don't kill it!"
You think the people of the Valley of the Wind are these much nicer people, which to some extent they are. But dude, they kill that. They kill the baby Ohm, and like that's the thing why I said it's a trauma, because we've talked about this before. That's a traumatic experience that she's having. That's why she's remembering in that moment, like
100%
traumatized as a little girl by them watching him kill this
childhood memory. Yeah.
And she just wanted to protect it.
She protects the Ohms now.
Yeah, it's really sad and messed up. And it was her dad, who she clearly idolized, who did it. And but yeah, getting back to the point about I'm saying about the ending and Miyazaki's distaste for it and my own distaste for it is, which is again why this movie is just not on the same league as some of his other films. And endings are hard. I don't think any of Miyazaki's endings are perfect, by the way, but they're all pretty abrupt and rappy-uppy. And even the ones that like the ending of Mononoke, without spoiling it or talking about it, pays a lot of lip service to complexity, but it's just kind of whatever. The ending of Spirited Away is very good. That one works. But anyway, with Nausicaa, and I don't know how the manga ends, so I have no idea if it's superior or works in the way I'm talking about. But
I can't wait to read it.
It's to me what you really need that it's missing is again this willingness to contend that like some even one sacrificial lamb or one heroine or any one person is not going to stop the problem.
Fix all the problems.
No, it's going to require a lot of a collective effort by everybody, and it's going to be messy, and it's not going to be clean, and anyone willing to do what Nausicaa's willing to do is not going to come out the other side of it like clean and happy. They're probably going to be damaged and brutalized. And and probably, you know, even worse in some senses. And you know, I'm not saying I want a movie that's that dark, but like I was alluding to with The Last of Us, I mean, that is a story where the main characters walk out of it like, I mean, it's devastation. I mean, literally the movie or the game ends in this place of devastation, but it's a meditative and actually fulfilling and weirdly hopeful devastation without getting into it. And that to me is the tone that I think Nausicaa needs for its ending. But I'll judge the actual ending of the manga when I see it. And again, Miyazaki carried it on so long, I'm not sure he had the same luster by the time he was ending it. Maybe he was just like, whatever, it's just over now. You know, but I think a perfect ending would have to be something like that, because that's the reality of the world we live in. And I respect stories that endings are difficult because the world's not over yet, but you know, you kind of have to find your way to go into those places where you can really, really kind of get somewhere, make the progress, but not undermine the work that still needs to be done, I guess.
Sure.
But okay, I think that more or less covers everything I want to say about the film. Is there anything else you wanted to point out?
I can't think of anything at the moment. Can't think of anything. I liked it a lot. Yay.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, Dana, this has been great. The episode should be dropping Friday. It's probably already Friday if you're listening to this. And we'll be back next week. I will talk to you, Dana, soon about what that next hit should be, but it'll be exciting when we get there. Yeah, we'll pick a movie.
Get some women, take them to the Peachtree Dams. I say get liquored up and take them to the Peachtree Dams.
Do you know what I mean? You know why? It's a scary thing to give to a guy like me. Do you know what I mean?
I say get liquored up and take them to the Peachtree Dams.
Do you know what I mean?
I say get liquored up and take them to the Peachtree Dams. Get liquored up and take him to the Peachtree Dams.
Do you know what I mean? You know why? Final cut. It's a scary thing to give to a guy like me.